feedback from our various visits. And I'm going by the list I've got in front of me. The first group on the list is Jacqueline, Thurza and Phil, who went to McKissick Ward. And I'm not sure who's feeding back. Is it you, Phil?
Yes, I'll start and then I'll let Thurza and Jacqueline pick up. So McKissick Ward, which is neurosurgery, we visited first and went in extremely welcoming. We actually first of all met a new team doing infusion, I think it's called, which is for people with multiple sclerosis, and they see day patients. So we chatted to them. They're new and they see about a dozen patients a day. So they were getting busy. Their issue of the day was that one of their team had called in sick, so they were having to beg, borrow and steal from other places to ensure they could get through their day's work. But they were looking forward to the day and were in good shape. We then went into the ward proper. McKissick were greeted by Paula and Jennifer. So Jennifer in charge and Paula, the lady on the desk who seemed to do everything, but was great. They were very welcoming, and we had a really good chat about the work there. There are generally 21 patients on neurosurgery with various things coming from various places, from ITU or from having had an operation, or all sorts of things, and heads and backs and things. And they enjoy working there. They enjoy the team spirit there, and it's not just in that ward, but they work, as said, with ITU, with other, neuro wards, etc. And it's one big team. And it was clean, tidy, well organised. It felt really welcoming, but medical, if you see what I mean. It was one of those places where I felt very comfortable straight away that there was a team in charge and they knew what they were doing. There are a lot of colleagues there, so there's quite a lot of one-on-one care in this particular ward, and people have had life-changing things happen to them, and so there can be sort of security issues as well, which are quite challenging. So there's a lot of, but the care felt of a very high standard. The one request was that they think their cleaning team have to work incredibly hard to get rid of every speck of dust. So if there's any opportunity to bulk up the cleaning team, that was their one thing. But they are a platinum standard. What's that? How does that? Water accreditation. Platinum water accreditation. So I mean, really uplifting visit. We then went on to the cath lab, which is a new facility, and I should say all of this is in the Atkinson Morley wing, I think, which is the PFI part of the hospital. And immediately got in there, and we were immediately greeted and had explained to us there was some fairly complicated procedures going on today. In fact, a country first procedure, which I'm going to let Jacqueline and Thurza talk about, because it's beyond my medical knowledge. But we saw into one of the cath labs where somebody had been brought in overnight and was being treated there and then, and it was a very impressive area. The team were all very buoyed up, excited, I'd say, on their game, and it was impressive. And they said that they really felt it was one of the best places to work in what they do in the country. So it was inspiring, the whole thing. So it's great. So I'm going to pass on to Thurza and or Jacqueline.
I'd just add a couple of reflections. So when we visited the ward, as Phil said, it felt welcoming. And when we asked them about the ward accreditation, I thought it was a real triangulation that they said that they were platinum. So in terms of ward accreditation and how it feels to strangers walking onto the ward, I think that really showed. And in relation to the cardiac lab that we went to, they thought that they were well recognised in terms of being world leaders. That was really good. They thought that the facilities they had were amazing, which is quite a change to hear from perhaps what we hear elsewhere. And the thing that they were talking about, which I think is worth taking forward, is that they need a wider clinical team. And I think that how we can support and look at using things such as apprenticeship levy to train other members of the team, because they will lose them once they are trained, and actually we need to have a pipeline of people being trained in such an amazing place.
Just lastly from me, the other thing for McKissick is that their label printer for wristbands has been broken, and they've been told by IT that it costs 400 quid and they can't afford it, but I think that's a patient safety issue. So where's Andrew?
Oh, he's at a FAC meeting. I gave him a
Right,
I
okay.
gave him a let out of jail free card.
I need to remember to pick that up. Thanks, Kate.
It was the same on Brodie. That they also had the same issue.
Yeah, patients without wristbands isn't a good thing. And I think the reflection, and it's interesting when you walk around an organisation you've been in for nearly 7 years and you're sort of just used to it, and then, you know, with two people who don't normally work here or come here, is you realise that our group has a really wide range of doing the world-class stuff down to looking, and then across to looking after patients in their home. And it's actually makes you realise the breadth that we deal with and how we have to remember each part of our organisation because all of it is important. Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you very much. So lots of good things, but the printer thing, it's that challenge, isn't it, of an organisation understanding where it absolutely must save money and where it's not a real economy at all. So, right, next on my list is James, Marsh, and Chris and Derek. Am I right?
So I'm going to be speaking for. It was actually Chris, Kate, and I. I think James
Marsh and I
swapped.
Oh, right. Okay, so I've got a false list here. So, right, Yin, you are going to feed back on...
Well, I'm going to introduce it, and then Chris
and what
is
are you
going
feeding
to be
back on?
On Brodie
on
ward.
Brodie ward, okay, right. Off you go.
Okay, so Brodie ward, neurosurgery. We received a very warm welcome from Sabina, who is the nurse in charge, and she showed us around the ward. It's 30 beds in total, mixed ward. And the average stay is about 2 to 3 days, or it could be 4 to 5, depending on the condition. There were 6 side rooms, and there was a very, very lovely outdoor area, complete with plants and everything else. And apparently it was donated by a patient's family. So it was very, very nice. And I think patients from the McKissick ward were able to use it too. And we were able to sort of walk around and had a chat with quite a lot of people. But I'm just going to stop there because Chris is going to feed back about the issues.
Thank you, Yin. Chris?
Thank you very much. As Yin said, we had a good welcome from the staff there. They also raised the issue about the scanners for the wristbands. So it's presumably fairly trust-wide, and if nothing else, I think perhaps every ward needs to be asked if they have problems, or perhaps that's known already. Staffing levels, they were a little bit under their allocated amount, was reasonable compared to other areas. One comment we asked them about what message they would like us to take back. And it was that they felt that neurosurgery on their ward wasn't terribly well recognised because it was such a speciality, they felt, and the other parts of the hospital didn't relate to it. That was just one person's opinion. I don't know if it's a wider one. It wasn't meant in a negative sense of any criticism of individuals, though. The ward itself looked very neat and tidy. I mean, perhaps slightly of note that with all the mobile computers now, they do clutter up corridors, but they're part of providing better care. The rest of the ward, as I say, was very neat and tidy, apart from the storeroom, which had the good problem of being full of stuff rather than being empty of stuff. They take both acute emergency patients and planned care patients. Sabina, who was the nurse in charge, enjoyed working with that mixture of patients. She thought that was a good way to work. She was very happy to be on that ward and had actually chosen it following her training. She'd been there 4 years. One of their key issues is regarding repatriation of patients back to a secondary care hospital, because they take patients from a very wide area, and also issues around transport, because some of the patients need 2 people to go with them in the ambulances, and that slows flow through the ward and therefore reduces the number of patients they can take in. Flow, of course, is an issue from many parts of the hospital, I know. The other area that they raised was they have a two-bedded ward for patients who sort of who need a bit more care and attention than the normal ward, but aren't sick enough to need ITU. Now, this is a good idea in principle, but sometimes the criteria for which patients are placed on the ward, they felt wasn't necessarily accurate enough, and sometimes they were asked to staff the ward and then no one arrived, and then suddenly they would be asked at the last minute to provide staff for patients. The principle of the unit, of course, they fully supported. And the other area of pressure, which I guess has already been mentioned by Phil, was that they do have patients who are confused because of their brain injury, largely. They felt they had good support from other wards on that, but it is a nursing pressure when you have a patient who's confused, and there may be behavioural problems that relate to that. Otherwise, I thought it was a very good visit, and I don't know if there's any way of monetising that balcony, because it's fantastic.
It is, and I must have had that conversation with people on several occasions, and it's difficult, isn't it? It's all to do with health and safety. Where's Andrew? Yes, it's all to do with health and safety, isn't it? And money.
Not so much money. There is a little bit of health and safety because it was designed it was designed more than 20 years ago, and it was originally designed that area as a private patients wing. So those balconies were there to support private patients. We can keep looking, but health and safety is quite a big challenge there, particularly with the type of patients that we have in the area.
It's one of those, I think, potential real wins that we've never managed to crack, presumably because there's always more pressing problems that are demanding our time, but we mustn't let it fall off the list. Right, I don't feel I can rely on my list now, but the next on my list is the Rose Centre. Who went there? And who's feeding back?
Probably me.
Okay, Richard, off you go.
Paul and I went to the Rose Centre, so I'd summarise by saying it was a really inspiring visit, actually. We met some really interesting and very well informed and good leaders who understood their services very, very well. The Rose Centre is primarily dedicated to breast clinic and breast screening, but also houses the melanoma clinic. So we talked to staff from both of those. I think that probably the key things I would say is in terms of the breast service, there were a lot of really impressive things. One of the most impressive things is how much they've done to catch up on the backlog of breast screening. And it's clear that people have put a huge amount of work into that. And we're meeting most but not all of our targets now. We have been meeting most but not all for quite a while, since last year. The one that we don't meet at the moment is the 62-day target, and one of the key issues in terms of capacity and demand is that for the longer pathways, if you're not really quick and agile right at the beginning, then you pay for it later in terms of being able to meet the target. And we're fielding breast surgeons really unnecessarily at the beginning of the pathway, in the sense that if we had enough advanced nurse practitioners, then they will be able to, if we had sufficient capacity there, the beginning of the pathway will be faster. And the surgeons would then be able to spend more time on the bits that really do need a surgeon. But people were characterising for us the patient journey, and it's very clear that most patients have a very efficient one-stop shop experience. And can go straight to, if they need to, can go straight to imaging or biopsy if that's indicated. Although I learnt a lot about the proportion of patients who actually are able to be discharged the same day, and it's quite high. It's something like, if I remember rightly, it's something like 90%. So that was really very, very impressive. We also saw the facilities upstairs. They were in use for delivering training, so we're running courses for people to learn. Today we're teaching biopsies, breast biopsies, and that's to, I think there are about 30 or 40 people who come to learn how to do breast spouts in the centre. So that's an income stream. These aren't our own staff. These are other people's staff. So it's just a reminder of how much we can play a role in training and building up expertise across the patch. In terms of melanoma, our melanoma service is run primarily by plastics rather than by dermatology, which is a slightly different model to other places. Essentially, the staff said that the area met their needs, except that it's not as big as it should be for what they want. So it wasn't built for the melanoma clinic to be there. They said if they had more space, then they would have the staffing capacity to see more patients faster. But again, the patient experience and the facilities to do what we need to do were very positive, I think. It's an environment that feels as if the proximity of everything to everything else has been really quite well designed. It was refurbished about 11 years ago, and it feels much more fit for purpose in that sense, in terms of layout, than a lot of places one goes to. Just on a couple of estates issues. So unfortunately, just over a year ago, they had a sewage leak. It made an enormous impression on them. They described it very calmly and cheerfully, but these things are pretty horrible. And they said that they're not absolutely sure that their view was they're not absolutely sure that we've got to the root cause of it in such a way that they feel secure that it won't happen again. And they described the unpleasant warning signs of that being about to happen, like the appearance of drain flies and bad smells. So I apologised on behalf of the board for the sewage leaks that we have had in the past. They're getting less frequent. And the other thing was fire safety. They were very on the ball with fire safety. They knew who their fire marshals were. I was shown around by one fire marshal. The environment's very uncluttered. They have 3 fire door exits. One is broken, so one is a double door where only one door will open. So if you're in a wheelchair, for instance, trying to use that fire exit, you wouldn't be able to get out through it. There are 2 others. Estates know about it and are engaged with it, so I'm told. But that seemed like a problem that needs to be quickly fixed.
Thank you very much, Richard. Really interesting to hear about the melanoma clinic, because it's not a place I've been to before. I need to get there. Their ongoing worry about sewage, is this something that's on estates' radar, Andrew?
Yeah, we've the underlying. Apologies for those who've just had their breakfast. The ongoing issue that we have with sewage at George's is that the capacity of the main sewer connections underground were never designed for the number of people that we now have on the site. In some areas, we were able to go in, increase the size and fix, and that is one that we have. In other areas, like an ED is probably the biggest one. The only way I can do that in ED is to shut ED for 3 months, dig all of the ground floor up and replace the sewer. And I'm guessing that I would not be very popular if I proposed doing that. So there are other mitigations that we can do with macerators and things like that, but it is always a constraint that we have on this site.
Understood, but it's interesting that from your point of view, the problem with the melanoma clinic's been, or that building's been fixed, and the staff still feel very
that's what
insecure about it. So is the scope to explain to them that actually there has been a physical fix that should make a difference?
That's the note I've made. It's a comms thing.
Lovely.
I think, yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so next on my list is the Major Trauma Centre. I think you went there, Jenny, but who knows?
I certainly did, and we went, Derek and I ourselves.
Oh, and Derek went with you, right.
Derek and I went with rash abandonment and the freedom because Andrew wasn't able to accompany us, but we conducted the task very well, and we're going to do a double-hander on the feedback. We were made to feel very welcome, and wow, what a space. It has been upgraded, and it just is really inspiring to see what we can do when we have the money and that. And the key elements of it were taking out some beds, and Chris mentioned storage. It really is an issue, but they've been able to do many things. For example, with major trauma patients, you often need hoists and other mechanisms, and they are actually within the ceiling, and so they've been integrated, so it takes a lot of the clutter out of the floor. the sinks and all areas. So, I mean, they really appreciated, and it was interesting to go on a visit where they weren't complaining about the estate. There was fantastic things, for example, oxygen and suction next to each bed. That's another important patient safety element. And another consequence of the upgrade are better storage solutions, which also meant less dust and dirt. And there was also a pharmacy distribution mechanism of Omnicell, which had all been embraced. So actually very positive from the point of view of the estate. The impact on clinical delivery, I think that they felt empowered to deliver good care in that space. They have a room adjacent to it where they can have their every morning an MDT meeting, and that again, that collaboration promotes better patient care. So I'll hand over to Derek now. There were some other areas, but I have to say, overall, it was a very positive visit.
Thank you, Jenny. Derek?
Yeah, and just record thanks to Aoife and Anna who showed us around and were very enthusiastic and engaged. We did ask about research, and there's an active trauma network, and it was good to know that that was going on. So there's a lot of audit and of the trauma patients, because I suppose it's a very well-defined patient cohort, and they're followed through by a trauma specialist nurse, which seems to be a system that works well. It's sort of alongside the ward activities, so the trauma specialist nurses also operate in other areas, and they go down to ED and they follow a patient through the journey. So they're not the same staff exactly as the ward staff, but they work with them, and that sounds to be a really good system. Sounds like it's working well. Areas for improvement, there were a couple of minor repairs, and I noticed they'd been sort of flagged up in the storage area, and one was reported on the 4th of October, a roller door problem reported, and obviously still causing problems with the access to things in the storage area. And another one reported on the 26th of October. They've all got signs up saying when they were reported and the reference number, so not quite sure who's sort of on the ball with those, whether they're just in a list to be sorted, but that 4th of October is, 6 weeks ago. So, the flow and discharges we talked about, doctors do need to get more engaged with this. I say this as a doctor, and one of the limiting factors is getting the discharge letter ready, getting the TTOs ready. So when pharmacy get them, they seem to work quite quickly, but getting the letter down, the prescription down there. The Omnicell system for drugs sounds great. It's only in 3 areas in the hospital so far, but it doesn't link with iClip. So you're entering the patient and the prescription, but then you're having to re-enter it because it's on iClip, but it's not connecting. So it just struck me as we missed a trick there. I mean, apparently it was too expensive to make it integrate. But if we're going to roll that out in other wards, I think that needs to be thought about. Because you enter a patient, but then you've got to enter their prescription on the Omnicell system to access the drug, and then you've got to tell iClip that you're dispensing that drug and do the wristband stuff. So it just struck me as a bit of joined up thinking there that could make the system work even better. It's a good thing, the Omnicell. Flow and discharges, getting patients out, clearly an issue. That's in other wards. And the other thing that came up was liaison with neurosurgery, and a shout out for, there's a consultant called Faye who's new, who seems to be turning up at the MDTs, and she's actually showing some interest. But patients with major trauma often have brain trauma as well, but we seem to have a very divided service, and there was obviously a lot of frustration with I don't know if Richard can feed this back to, I know it's not just, I shouldn't triangulate too much, but I know it's not just a problem with trauma, but that the liaison system with neurosurgery, I mean, they don't have an advanced nurse practitioner or an outreach worker. I mean, that would really make a difference, because everything has to go through this referrer patient system they use, and it's a real barrier. So I think technically and medically they do the right things, but it's obviously a frustration for the nursing staff that you just can't talk to a neurosurgeon. You have to talk to refer a patient on the online system. And so I don't know, I think that needs some looking at. Faye is, there is a bit of light there, and a shout out to Faye. And just to finish on a patient note, chatted to a patient who'd had what we would call a life-changing injury. She shouted out for someone called Venice, who'd looked after her very well. Maybe you could feed that back. Her main issue was the uncertainty about where her rehab was going to be. She didn't know whether she was going to go back to Kingston or whether she was going to go to Hampton, which is obviously a specialist unit for her kind of problem and would be much better. But she was incredibly positive about the quality of the care and the attention of the nurses and the way in which she'd been treated. So, and she's setting up a group called the Bionic Beauties. She's a woman of a certain age, shall we say, and she's going to set up this group called Bionic Beauties for people who've had life-changing injuries, which I thought was lovely.
Thank you, Derek. I think 2 points that you made that struck me forcibly. One was your question about what happens to all those, general estates queries, and there was one that was clearly a number of weeks old. So perhaps, Andrew, you would briefly tell us the answer to that. And the other point that I think you made very forcibly, and it's true of the health service generally, is we penny pinch because the money isn't there, often on IT systems and things. And the end result is that there's more work for people. So there's never a strategic overview about where money would be. And it's not a criticism of us. I think it's very difficult in the NHS to do this. But there is a lovely example, your drug example, isn't there? And somebody will have said there's no money for that without thinking through. And there probably wasn't, but without thinking through. And I often feel quite helpless in terms of us being able to address those issues. I think if there was more effective investment in IT at a national level for the NHS, we might find we didn't have quite as many of the staffing problems that we had, and our staff would have a better experience. But I'll get off that hobby horse while Andrew tells us what happens with the routine maintenance issues.
Yeah, things are put into three categories. There's a P1 to a P3, where things are responded to. P1, which is the most urgent, is 1 to 2 hours. P3, which is the least urgent, is 72 hours. I have a feeling on the trauma ward what has happened is we're still in the warranty period from the main contractor handing over, and I don't know this for a fact, but my guess would be some of these things have been flagged as things that we need to get the contractor to come back as post occupancy snags to do. I will go back and double check on those. So it's perhaps just a bit of a quirk because that is such a new space for us, and the contractor should be looking after it.
Thank you, but if you could check. And
I will.
Thanks for clarifying the P1 to P3. I was up on the ward last week, and endorse all the things that Jenny said, and the staff were so enthusiastic. And it's a lovely example of you give people a high quality environment. And they said to me they knew they were they could do a much better job for patients as a consequence of having the right space and all the rest of it. So that was lovely to see, and great that both Jenny and Derek experienced it as well. So next on my list, which I have lost confidence in, so I'm just not sure, is according to this, Andrew and Martin went, I think, with Kate, but who knows, to the new MRI suite. So who's going to correct that and speak about it?
James and I swapped, which is my fault.
Yeah, so we had James.
The MRI many times, and I thought I'd probably be better value going to
That's absolutely.
I'm not aware of any other swaps, but I will take this one.
So who's feeding back on the new MRI suite?
Martin and I can. Do you want to go first, or would you like me to go first, Martin? Okay. So MRI, it's newly built. It's amazing. You've got 3 new scanners in there, which were funded nationally, and then the building was funded locally, and it's really impressive because it's new build, fantastic facilities. It was clean, it was well organised, and we got a warm welcome. The morale in the department seems good. It felt like there was good leadership there. They've got a real focus on training, development and support. And that felt positive, which is why they've got people coming through and they're okay in terms of workforce. They deal with outpatients and inpatient scanning. First thing in the morning is largely outpatients, so it didn't feel particularly busy. It's quite well ordered and structured and organised. They book patients at 30-minute intervals, and because it's outpatients they can be quite ordered about that and people aren't waiting for a long time. It gets a bit more difficult when they start to deal with inpatients, and that's very unpredictable, the flow of inpatients, and the big challenge for them is portering. So patient might be scheduled for 9:30 and not turn up till 11, and then they get patients arriving in batches, and it makes it really difficult to manage the flow of patients. So that was a big thing that they wanted us to bring back, really, was the issue they've got around portering, and they're still trying to get to grips with the new system that has been rolled out around managing portering, but at the moment it's not working particularly well for them. The other thing that might help a bit with productivity is they do paediatric MRIs, and some of those children have general anaesthetics, and that occupies anaesthetists, and they get a bit stuck, and the anaesthetists get held up. They felt if they had a paediatric GA recovery nurse, that would be really helpful and would actually help free up anaesthetics time and help the flow. The other thing to flag is that Atkinson-Morley wing MRI is going to close in December for 6 months whilst there's work being done there, and the department here is going to have to absorb that work, which is the normal scanning and also research scanning, and it wasn't quite clear how that's going to work in terms of demand and capacity, and how that is going to be looked at in terms of the priority of activity. The other thing to say is they had an opportunity to take part in some national research that would have been funded around scanning, but they didn't have capacity to take that on. So there's sometimes a little bit of tension between the standard work and potential research work that could go on. That's probably enough from me. Martin, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just add a few things. So one of the things that stood out was that they'd said that after COVID, most MRI departments in London and generally were still struggling staffing-wise, because a lot of NHS staff in those areas were lost to the private sector, which was growing. But we were in a better position here than anywhere else in London, was their view. So obviously asked them why. And of course, we all know this, but it's very reassuring to hear that, paraphrasing, it was essentially that it's quite a small world. People know each other in different departments. They've got a very good name because of the morale, the teamwork and the leadership in that unit, and therefore they find it easier to attract and retain staff. Yeah. So that's always quite an endorsement of doing that stuff. The second thing, not so good, that I certainly hadn't appreciated, was that they were saying that it's actually a very physically demanding job, and they gave a particular example of a colleague who's currently off because they've injured their elbow as a result of the volume of lifting that they did during a very long shift. And it did strike us, although, you know, little knowledge is dangerous and all that, but it did strike us that there might be a case for actually employing people or creating some sort of role which assists with the more physical demands of the job, given the highly skilled nature of the other work they're doing. It wouldn't seem that difficult to do. And the other area that we looked at, which I think was interesting more generally, traditionally, the route into this as a career is to do a radiology degree. They've now got 4 apprentices who were doing jobs in other parts of the trust. So really good news, really good use of modern apprenticeships. But they said that they were in substantive roles, which doesn't seem like a big deal. But that's very unusual in organisations, because if you put apprentices in substantive roles, or there's no other way to do it, it was their view, you actually negatively impact productivity, because clearly they won't be able to do as much as more experienced people, and you create a perverse effect in terms of cost, because they will be much cheaper. They're lower banded, plus you get money back from the apprenticeship levy. So it might be worth somebody having a look at that and seeing whether there is a more effective way to do it. But essentially, again, you know, a very good news story that we're developing our own people and training people to become radiographers in a very scarce profession.
Well, that's really good to hear, Martin, and also interesting, those points. If we had more time, we'd explore them, but I'll make sure that they're understood offline. But did you want to come in, Jacqueline?
I'm just wondering, because lifting and handling is a big issue, and we've got we've moved away from people lifting patients themselves to actually using different pieces of kit. So I think maybe, I was just whispering to Steph that we actually do a lifting and handling thing in there and see what actually we can help them with, so that we're not injuring staff.
Yeah, and I might have not got that entirely straight, to be honest. I don't know if
Well,
James is that how you heard it?
It's worth checking out anyway, isn't it?
So that is the message that was conveyed to us, but I think, as Jacqueline says, we need to understand the details about how that workflow operates and how people are supported and appropriately trained with the right techniques for manual handling. Can I just add a couple of points, Gillian?
Of course.
I went on this visit, although I wasn't scheduled to. So I endorse the comments that Andrew and Martin said. What an amazing space. It really is a lovely space. It's a team that really take pride in the service they're offering. A couple of other things that we noted. Whilst we were there was a medical physicist who was doing a planned quality assurance check on one of the scanners, and we're one of the few hospitals that have our own in-house medical physics team. And the enthusiasm and the pride and the energy that he took in offering that service was just amazing. And we offer that service at cost to other trusts and private hospitals. So I think it's a service that pays for itself. So that was really uplifting to see. And then we went upstairs and saw some of the seminar room space and the space where the radiologists were reporting, and the multidisciplinary team meetings that are getting increasingly complex now have a really wonderful facility to operate those meetings from. And it was good to see. I've got some inside knowledge. My wife is a radiologist at another hospital, and she talks about some of the challenges about creating the teamwork with people working off-site and on multiple sites, and having a hub of people and a critical mass of people on site to interface with each other. But it was really good to see so many registrars and consultants reporting together, and the consultant who took us round was talking about the positive benefits of those interactions and the availability to get immediate access to specialist input if one of the general radiologists needs some help on reporting.
Thank you, James. All of that's really good to hear. Thank you for the plug for medical physics. Kate and I spent some time on a lovely estate day talking to a lot of your folk in that area, and they were, I mean, if you could bottle their enthusiasm, you could sell it for a lot of money, actually. They were an absolutely great bunch, weren't they, Kate? Yeah, it was a lovely day. Okay, so as usual, we're running out of time. Next on my list are Tim, Peter, Stephen and Steph, who went to Rodney Smith and Allingham wards. And I suspect it's Tim and Peter who are feeding back. And they've got a challenge to be comprehensive but brief.
Okay, accepted. I'll see what I can do. So we stayed completely to script, so all the right people went to the right place this time, so that was a good start. And perhaps I could start by just thanking Linda and Fiona, who actually hosted our visit. And just a reflection, both of them sort of briefed us in the corridor before we went into the ward, and it was a good opportunity to sort of ask all of those basic questions, if you like, so that by the time we actually got into the ward space, we actually had got the context and sort of understood what we were looking at, really. So I actually found that just a very helpful way of actually constructing the visits so that we got the most out of it. So to try and make this sort of efficient of time, both of those wards, we went to Allingham ward and Rodney Smith ward. Both of them are acute medical wards. Both of them are 28 bedded, 4 bays of 6 plus 4 side rooms. In terms of staffing, both have 6 nursing staff by day, 4 by night, and 3 or 4 HCAs in support as well. And both of them have their own challenges in terms of the medical situations that they're dealing with. So if I could start with Allingham ward. Allingham is a gastro ward, so a lot of liver patients there, and also dealing with nutritional issues as well, sort of typically patients who are significantly or severely underweight for whatever reasons, whether that's because of cancer pathways they've been on or whatever. A really challenging case mix. So Linda was saying to us that a lot of the liver patients are the result of alcohol abuse, and we do get quite a lot of repeat visits. So, we know a lot of these patients very well. In terms of length of stay, weeks to months for some of them, and, sadly returning to us later as well. So really, a phrase I learned recently was medical stabilisation, and it struck me that this was a sort of a case of that, really, is that we brought, had patients in and we stabilised them, and then we sent them away, and they sadly sort of came back to us. Couple of particular things. Interesting is a theme here about WOWs, workstations on wheels, because both of the wards have got new kit, and very slick it looks too, but physically they're very bulky, very big, so actually led to sort of clutter in the corridors. I understand that there is a compact WOW that is sort of available. I don't know how much more compact that is from the standard one, but it just struck me as something that might be worth having a look at. But great to see that sort of new equipment actually being used. On Rodney Smith, they did actually say that they do have a bit of a problem with these new WOWs. They've had them for about 3 months, and they do seem to have a problem of shutting themselves down and going offline every 20 minutes or so, which is obviously a frustration. So hopefully that's something that's going to get dealt with. Just on estates, both of them very similar, really, I guess, in terms of age and what have you, and really quite clean and sort of visually quite appealing. Allingham Ward were delighted that they had their new shower wet room and showed it to us, and it looked great. Rodney Smith were really looking forward to getting theirs, Andrew, and they said they know it's on the list, they know it's in the plan, but they haven't heard anything recently. So I said that I would mention that they just wanted to catch up with Allingham, really, on that. We met a patient on Allingham, a Mr. Greenwood, who was really praiseworthy of the friendliness of the staff, the care that he'd received. He was almost like a secret shopper, really, in a way, because he was actually a 12 years retired cardiologist. So he certainly knew what he should expect, perhaps, in the setting. And very sadly, he's been with us 3 weeks. Sadly, he'd had a fall and fallen backwards down a flight of stairs, so injured himself. But looking forward to going to Queen Mary's for rehab. So having done recent visits there, it was interesting to hear his little story and his journey. Probably in the interest of time, that's probably all I would put in there, unless Peter wants to add anything.
Just very briefly, a couple of points on staffing. Generally good in both wards. We were told it was 95% overseas nurses, particularly in Rodney Smith, which is partly a reflection, they said, they're both quite tough wards, otherwise quite hard to recruit to. But once the ones they have stay, and it creates a good, stable environment, and the transition from arrival is quick and well managed. So I think that was positive. The thing that they have to encounter, given the nature of the wards, is a fair amount of daily aggression, dealing with quite difficult, challenging patients. It's almost normalised to the extent that they accept that's part of the job, and they didn't say they didn't get appropriate support. So in which case it is what it is, but nonetheless makes it a very challenging environment. The only other point on the patient discussion we had in the other ward, I had a quick discussion with a patient with learning difficulties who was, again, very, very, very pleased with the treatment he was getting, so much so that he gave, I think it was Fiona, a kiss on the hand to express his best wishes. So very sweet, but overall positive feedback. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Peter. Was there anything that
There was just one
needed
point.
to add?
When Tim and Peter were meeting some of the patients, I spoke to a group of junior doctors. They were incredibly enthusiastic. They were absolutely fantastic in terms of the feedback they gave in terms of their experience. I guess the one thing, talking about challenges they had, and there's no easy answer to this, is just but wanting to emphasise the scale of the medical outliers they were dealing with and the impact that had on their their ward rounds and in terms of them being able to finish their shift routinely working beyond their hours, partly because of this. Yeah. And then the other thing, not specific to the wards, but just talking to the head of nursing about the impact of and the challenges around boarding in supporting ED. No pushback in terms of the need to do it, completely understood that, but just showing physically some of the space challenges that existed as a result. So just wanted to flag those.
I think both important points, but as we will talk about later, whatever the space constraints on wards, they're not nearly as challenging as the space constraints in ED. Sorry, were you wanting to come in, Jacqueline?
Yeah, just sat on. Just several things. Just to remind us that mentioning patients and wards and their previous occupation makes that patient identifiable in the public domain. So if we can make sure we don't do that, and don't put that in the minutes, please, Deirdre, if that's all right. So I just needed to say that. But the other thing is just about violence and aggression. I think we've been quite struck as an executive about the issues we had on one of our intensive care units with a particular family. So I've taken it upon myself to pull in some staff and a bit of extra support to actually redo our violence and aggression against staff policy, because both of them are pretty weak. And I think that really showed us that red carding a family member or even a patient is really hard, because there are legal issues around that we haven't really thought through because we've never had to. But we were getting near that stage. But also the bigger thing for me is our staff don't realise that we can intervene and we will intervene, and they think that they should accept difficult patients or difficult relatives, and they really shouldn't. So there'll be a bit more of a campaign, but I'm just beginning to set some of that up, Chair, because I think that's really important for our staff across all of our sites.
James, did you want to say something? I've given up trying to control it.
Just to add to that, I completely agree, and it definitely needs to be strengthened at ESTH. I think sometimes our staff don't realise that we have intervened. So, I've had occasions where I've gone to lengths, particularly when we've picked it up as part of the complaint process, to make sure staff are aware that we have put a marker down with a particular patient or relative or family. Because sometimes, these processes happen, and actually we don't feed back to staff consistently that we have sometimes made an intervention.
Okay, I think that's really helpful for the board to know, because it's an area I know that concerns many of us, and we look forward to hearing about that work as it develops, Jacqueline. We've still got one more to go. I went to Freddie Hewitt, and at various times I had the pleasure of James B. And Andrew A's company, but neither of them was there sufficiently long to be able to feed back, so you're going to have to hear a bit from me. I will be as quick as I possibly can be. The ward was very calm. The ward manager was actually the deputy, but she was under intense pressure with hundreds of people literally wanting to speak to her, but she managed nevertheless to be very polite and welcoming. And then I was with a senior nurse. We went off and chatted to people on our own. So it kind of worked. Although she did manage to tell us that she was coping with a number of people not having turned up through sickness. So whilst the ward had good staffing levels, permanent staff, sickness was a problem. We spoke to a very junior nurse, newly qualified, had done her last stint of training at George's, chose to come to us, looking after 4 patients, one of whom was a very challenging mental health patient. But important, I think, to say that the nurse did feel well supported, and she had a registered mental health nurse with her. And we talked about the challenges that these cases pose, both for the patients and families, and also for our staff. We spoke to a play specialist who was hugely enthusiastic about the work and the difference that they can make. And then we spent quite a long time talking to a grandma, actually, who gave us a lot of information about the experience the family had with a very small and very, very unwell baby, now on the mend. And the general message was that they had been very well supported, but they did feel that the speed of deterioration of the child had not been recognised soon enough, and they thought that was probably about communication failures, which I think is something we've heard about before. And there was an issue about whether the ward, the child wasn't initially put on Freddie Hewitt, they were put on Nichols, and they needed Optiflow, and the staff didn't have confidence about dealing with it. So I think there's a training issue that we need to take away there, Steph. What the grandma emphasised was what a supportive team Freddie Hewitt was, and she called out, as well as the nursing staff and doctors, the housekeeper, who she said was just extraordinarily caring and considerate, and the cleaners. And she said that she and her family had been made to feel so welcomed and supported, and it had made and was continuing to make a difference at a really difficult time. So. Lots of good things there, but lots of things we know about and we're seeking to support staff with. Okay, that enables us to move into the formal part of the agenda. Welcome to everybody, welcome to the members of public in our audience and to two of our governors, Richard and Hilary, who've joined us today. I've got a number of apologies. Anne Beasley and Aruna and Arlene have given their apologies. Arlene is represented by Steph. Welcome back, Steph. Lovely to see you. Andrew Grimshaw will be late. I agreed with him that given what's happening in the NHS finances at the moment, he needed to be at a key finance meeting, and it does mean later on in the afternoon he will be able to give us a very up-to-date briefing. So when Andrew wanders in at 11:30, he hasn't just got up late, there's been a very good reason for it. And Kate will have to leave us earlier in the afternoon than normal. And again, there were very good reasons for that, which we don't, the detail of which we don't need to discuss, but again, that is agreed. And Martin equally has to leave at about 2 o'clock. So I will be adjusting the afternoon agenda because I'd like Martin to be there for a particular item. So without further ado, we'll go on to any new declarations of interest. No? Could we agree the minutes of the previous meeting? Yes, thank you very much, everybody. The action log is short and sweet, and there's one item there proposed for closure because there's a proper mechanism for doing the review of the new infrastructure committee, the first meeting of which is before us later today. And then that takes us on to item 1.5 and the Chief Executive's report. Jacqueline.
So, Gillian, I'm not going to go through any of the reports. I'm happy to take questions. Only to say we've, after some feedback about it was always far too positive, we've tried to make it a bit more dour. So, so happy to balance. Thank you, Gillian. That's why you're the chairman. Balance. So happy to take any questions.
Are you going to talk about ED? When are you going to talk about ED?
Oh, yes, I will. I will. Actually, you're right. I meant to mention. On. So I think, yes, the only thing I will pick up, and I know that both Kate and James will talk when we talk about performance a bit more about the concerns we have about our emergency department, and that's across all of our emergency departments. The pressure they are under, particularly given the 136, the police now bringing patients that they pick up with mental health problems direct to ED rather than taking them to police cells, but just the general pressure in our EDs, which is phenomenal, and we're not even really stepping into winter in a big way yet. And I think all of us who have been around our EDs really feel for them, for the staff, because they're under tremendous pressure. But they have asked us as a board that we actually send them a letter recognising the difficulties that they're working under. I think we also feel we need to go through some of the things we're trying to do to help, because we really are trying to do 100 things to try and get ED into a far better place, which is safe for staff and for patients. And recognising that there might be things that go wrong there, but we know that we'll be supportive through that. So Gillian and I have yet to agree it and sign it off, but if you're all right, we will send it out under Gillian and my name on behalf of the board, if that is, if everyone is happy with that, and you trust us to write a a decent letter?
Well, I spoke with NED colleagues about it earlier and everyone was very supportive. I think we will want to have a discussion and you need to think where in the agenda is the right place to do it, about what we're doing. Do you want to do it under the performance
I think so. I
element?
think that it fits better under there, if that's
Okay,
all right.
I don't mind, but I think we're all in the same place. We absolutely want to give our support, and I've been doing a whole series of visits throughout our EDs in the last couple of weeks, and I've described graphically to anyone who'll listen to me the reality of it, and I know a number of executive colleagues have done exactly the same, and we've all had the similar experience. But I think it's important that whilst recognising the difficulties and giving the letter of support, it was staff who asked me if we were prepared to do it, and I readily agreed, that as a board we're clear about what we're actually doing to try and make a difference. Giving a visible sign of support is really important, but it's not enough. We need to try and do things differently, hard though that is. So as long as we're going to have a proper discussion about that, because I know non-executive colleagues in particular will want to hear about that and understand the things that we're doing that will try and make a difference. So I'm sure everyone is happy that we should write such a letter and we will circulate it to everybody. Yeah. Okay, so questions for Jacqueline. Yin, Martin, Peter. I'll take a batch of questions if that's okay, and then that speeds us on our way. So, Yin.
Thank you. Jacqueline, it's about paragraph 5.1 of your report about the work that Sally Hearn is doing. I just wanted to find out some ideas about timescales, please. Thank you.
Martin.
Yes, I see that you've got a big meeting coming up. I think you call it the 100.
The Gesh 100.
Yeah. Could you update us on what you feel is going well and not so well in terms of implementing the group?
Well, it's a jolly good question, Martin. Peter.
Thank you. Jacqueline, your report, which is very helpful, but brings out the challenges that you're working with it, and you touch on winter pressures, and we're almost on the verge of winter now. And I just wonder, you know, to what more you're planning to do to manage those winter pressures in extraordinarily difficult circumstances, where there's like to be further pressures on the finance front that will kind of constrain possibly what can be done. But it'd be just good to hear a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Okay, do you want to take those three and then I'll take some more?
I will. So Sally Hearn. So Sally's here for a year. We might be able to swing it for another 6 months after that. She's here to really look at how how our governance systems throughout the whole group need to work, so that we've standardised them across the group and actually hopefully simplified them as well. And having worked with Sally previously, she's quite she's gentle but incredibly challenging in a very gentle way. So
not sure gentle would be the first adjective. But
polite, maybe I should say. So she starts. She's already had a couple of weeks, but she's now on holiday. She's starting in maternity, and she's starting maternity at George's, and then she will go over to maternity at Epsom and Helier. And then from whatever she's learnt there, it will hopefully mean that we do it quicker as we go through the wider organisation. And so her timescales are a year. It might need 18 months, but at the minute we've got her seconded from the NHSE for a year. Does that help you?
Okay.
I'm sure also that she might want to after.
I'm sure she'll want to talk
at some
to
point.
Neds.
Yeah.
So
Martin, the Gesh 100. So the Gesh 100 is. I'll just talk about that for a minute. It's really my baby, really, because I wanted to bring together the senior leadership team across the organisation, so the triumvirates from the divisions, the leadership teams across the 3 sites, and also the corporate services leadership teams into one room, with a series of meetings that start with about yourself, you know, who are you as a leader, and then begin over the next 2 years around expanding that out to the team, to the environment you work in type thing. So that is where we're going with that. And how do I think the group is working? So when I suppose like most people, I wish we were going quicker. But it's really, and I'll talk about it in part 2 about the chief execs meeting, the national chief execs meeting I went to on Wednesday, because I think we sometimes think it's only us, and actually it's not. I haven't met a chief exec who doesn't say how tough it is, and how at the moment you're trying to do the strategic stuff and manage the day-to-day when actually the day-to-day is taking over. But you need to do the strategic stuff because you need some hope in your organisation, and that's the strategic stuff is the stuff that will help fix the issues you're having now. And that is a conundrum we're all working, and we've got the added bit there about then trying to bring two organisations together. And when you talk to other people that are in groups or merged organisations, you know, it takes 5 to 10 years to get to a different place, and I want it to happen tomorrow. And I think the bit that, you know, feels like it's going slowly, but people tell me we're not making bad progress, is corporate services. So I think the bit for me is that is the key for me around how we really begin to work together, because the bit is not bringing the teams together and the structure. The real bit of this will be when once we've done that, it's about the processes and how we harmonise the teams and how we really sort out some of the overcomplicated, difficult processes that are very different depending on where you go into one that makes sense and is easy for staff to use. And that is the bit for me that's the exciting bit. It's a bit that I think will make the difference. And once we've got through the bit about bringing corporate services together, well, we've already started to think about how do we do that piece of work, because I'm not sure we've always got the skills in the organisation to really, really think how do we really get the best of this to get to a different place so we don't have issues with staff who leave not being, you know, things aren't being sent in for staff who have left and we're paying them, and things that actually are a real issue, and how we really begin to motor on some of those cultural bits. So I'd say, Martin, if I'm being honest, I think we're probably where we should be, despite we think we're not, but when you talk to others, that's where it is. I think we need to get to a place where we're not a complicated organisation to run, because at the minute it feels overly complicated and complex. And I think there are opportunities for us to think about how do we help that as well. So if that's a helpful response to that, Martin. Peter, I do wonder whether we need to answer that question when we talk bigger, that's terrible English, Jacqueline. We talk more about the ED pressures, because I don't have all the details at my fingertips. And I think some of the stuff that they'll be talking about today, because I saw in the HS Day this morning, it said that most of the winter money pressures, winter monies have now gone. So that is news, and we need to work that through quite urgently. So I think that's the bit about, we can talk about some of this, but then probably a bit more we need to do a bit of thinking and sorting on very quickly, because I think we've got a moving feast with the money at the minute, and we haven't got yet to a landing place, because this is all in the last couple of days, to sort of make that work through. Is that? I think it's fine for now. I'm sure we'll come back. Yeah, we definitely will.
I think we'll come back to both the pressures when we're talking about the IQPR, but also the money when Andrew's with us this afternoon. So, Phil, I saw you, and I think there might have been others along this line, but Phil, off you go.
Thank you, Gillian. So I was going to ask about productivity, because I think as to unlock some of these enormous issues which are there, and by the way, I think the report is better to be more balanced. So thank you for that change. And there are some significant issues, but one way of unlocking some of these is productivity. And I suppose I was then thinking the question was asked about the gesh 100, and you know, can we square the circle between some of these visits we've had today where actually things are going very well, with how do we then get the leaders to enact change, if you like, while they're running their departments, to, you know, bring that calmness and good care, etc., into places where, to be honest, there is more difficulty. And it's a sort of, I struggle to square that circle when I come here. I can go to a place where it's really calm and good and all the rest of it. Then you read the big issues about finance and productivity. Then you see a place which is struggling. And how are we trying to square that circle? Is that a leadership issue that we go at through the gesh 100, or so that people can get into their heads that changing the organisation at the same time as running it is the only way that we can solve this issue?
And I think...
Can I just see if there's any
yes,
more
Cam.
speakers, because I'm conscious of time. And has anyone else got a question for Jacqueline? Oh, this is the last one. Good. Okay, you can answer that and then we can move on.
So I think that goes back to what I was saying about, sometimes when you go outside the organisation, you talk to your other 200 colleagues that are around and listen to the national team. And my reflection, and I've mentioned it to some of the team, was if we feel really busy all the time, we feel like we've got no space to do the thinking, no space to actually do any of the doing. And if we're feeling like that, then I suspect most of our teams in all of our organisations are feeling like that too. So the question I have given myself that I will talk through with the team over the next couple of weeks is, what is it we need to stop? How is it we need to operate together? And what is it that we can do that gives us a space to make sure that every day is like today, because if we continue like that, we'll never make any changes. And how do we still govern the organisation appropriately? Because those are the two bits we have to fight with all the time. How do we make sure we're governing this well? And how do we actually try and make sure that we're doing what we should be doing day to day? And how do we make the changes we need to do to make tomorrow better, not just for our staff and our patients? And I haven't yet got the answer to that, Phil, but I think as a chief exec, it's my leadership responsibility to ask that question. Because if we don't change how we're operating and begin to influence our teams about how they're operating, we'll just continue to get what we've currently got. And so I think that's the best answer I can give you with that. That said, we do know that we've got plans for the productivity bit is a big focus, because whether it's right or not, some of the conversations at the minute about money. And we need to make sure, productivity doesn't often release anything. It's not a cost saving, but it does mean hopefully we might be able to do more with less, or more with the same at least. I know that, both of the acute sites are absolutely focused on how do we get our theatres running better, how do we actually do a lot of that productivity bit, because as an organisation and to be credible, we need to move that on for all sorts of reasons.
Thank you, Jacqueline. I think that's helpful. I think it's not just the chief executive's leadership role. I think it's the board's leadership role. I think you need to know that you have our support on that, but also we've got to challenge each other as well. And you and I spend a lot of time talking about if we carry on doing what we've always done, we'll get what we've always had. And we've had that discussion about mental health. I think we will have that discussion later about flow and about how we balance risk in the community and in hospitals. And I think we've got a leadership role in the system, given that we're 2/3 of the acute provision, and we have to fill that space, because I don't see how else it's going to be done. So I think that's a challenge to all of us, actually, and I'm sure that's where Phil was coming from. The board needs to find time to focus on the strategic and not get bogged down in the day-to-day, but we still have an important assurance role about the day-to-day. So despite all of that discussion and some of the weighty matters, did you want to come back?
No.
We're asked simply to note the report. People happy to do that? Lovely, thank you. Right, you'll see that we've altered the agenda, so we take the items, the reports from committees first. We agreed at our last meeting we'd try it this way. And we'll see at the end whether we think it's been the most effective way of discussing business. But we're starting with the Quality Committee in common, and Andrew, that's over to you.
Thank you.
Oh.
Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Thank you. So this is a report on behalf of myself and Aruna. I'll take it as read. The cover sheet, we've pulled out 3 key areas of focus. The first is maternity services. Now, maternity service report is on the agenda later, so I won't go into too much detail on that. Two things I think just to pull out. One is the external review that we're having of our Embrace data, which is the stillbirth and neonatal deaths. That is due to report in February. But what we've agreed at committee is we need to just be looking at that data in real time, not waiting for reviews of Embrace data that date from 2020 and the latest one 2021. So in the November committee meeting, we're going to have a real-time look at our current mortality data and see what the trend has been over the last few years, because it's important we're doing that in a different way. The other thing to talk about is the maternity incentive scheme. So I don't think we will deliver all those elements, and I think we probably just need to, going forward, have a realistic conversation about which we think we will deliver and which we won't, and what the impact of that will be. The second thing that's flagged up is the quality impact assessment of cost improvement plans. So we had a more detailed look at that at the last committee meeting and felt assured that there is a process in place and that the cost improvement plans are being looked at through a quality and safety lens, and that the right decisions are being made around that. The third thing that was flagged up is the quality and safety risks. So we looked at the quality and safety risks at the last quality meeting. I think what's clear is they don't reflect the risks that the executive feel are the ones we should really be looking at, and we're going to have a preliminary look in November at a revised list, but we're expecting to see a proper report come back to January, which will be refreshed and will be better reflect the things we think we need to be paying attention to. There were two other things from the body of the report that I wanted to comment on in section 4.1, serious incidents. I think it's really important to note that there's still a number of open investigations at Epsom St Helier and open actions that haven't been delivered, and we don't think it's okay to wait for introducing PSERF and hope it all comes out in the wash. We're really pushing to get those actions, those investigations completed and the actions closed, and the committee was quite clear about that. The final thing I just want to say is in the same section, infection prevention and control, which is page 8 of the report. At the last meeting, we had an update from the actual clinical leads of infection prevention and control, which was really helpful, because questions we'd kept coming back to committee by committee and asking the same questions, we actually had a comprehensive answer, and it made us think the data we're looking at is probably not the right cut of the data. We're not looking at it in the right way. So it made us ask proper questions about what do we need to see to really feel assured, and it took the conversation forward a lot. So I just think there's something we can probably learn from that in terms of areas we need to focus on. How do we get the right people in the room to have the conversation that really gives us assurance, so we can put it to bed and then be clear what we need to monitor going forward.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that point's really well made. It was very striking in the meeting how it did change the nature of the discussion that we had. Right, questions or comments from colleagues? Well, I was at the meeting. But if no one else is going to ask a question, I'm just going to have a little discussion with Andrew about CSNT. And Steph might want to join in as well.
CNST.
Well, yes, whatever. You know, I always get. Well, it's got a different name now, hasn't it? It's
Maternity Incentive
It's
Scheme,
Ms now.
Yeah.
I can't get Ms wrong, which is so that's quite helpful. If we don't think that we're going to be able to get everything done, which I really struggle with, because we never used to have a problem with this. We used to get it done in both organisations. I don't really understand what's gone wrong that last year and this year we don't seem to be able to nail it. And it's probably unfair to ask Andrew that question because he's quite new, but I'd quite like Steph's view on that, if you don't mind, and perhaps Richard's, because it troubles me that this was something that never seemed to create a problem for the organisations, and now it does.
Thank you. CNST has changed over the years and the ask has changed, and the percentages to attain have changed. So for us as a group, where we're struggling is mandatory training, which really we shouldn't be. You could see by the report that we're bringing here today around the obstetricians, but there's been an improvement from 35% to 80%. in St George's, but it's the day-to-day things that we can influence. One of the other things that stops us from getting the CNST is Saving Babies bundle. And around that is around transitional care, so it's avoiding babies' admissions to the neonatal unit. So that's something that we're looking at as part of our establishment review. We do a little bit of TC, but not enough. So we don't want those babies going to neonate. We want to keep them with the mums on the ward. So that really, what else around CNST? The IT systems we use. There's a national issue with Euroking. Badgernet is used in Epsom, which is great, but there's a national issue around Euroking. The data overrides itself. So other organisations have this issue too. So we're not being penalised currently for that. So that's a really good thing. But again, we are looking at our IT. We've got money to do lots of work on it, and that starts in a month's time. So that's really good. Is there anything else I've left?
Transitioning to Badgernet?
No, no.
So with
Cerner.
No, Euroking isn't Cerner.
No, but we're going to have Cerner
Yes.
in maternity.
Instead, right, okay.
Yeah. And that work's been underway for some
Yes,
time, hasn't
yes,
it?
we've had that money for nearly 18 months.
Exactly. So I suppose in summary what you're saying, Steph, is it is a higher standard than it used to be. But nevertheless, it doesn't kind of remove my worry, I think. Richard?
I agree with Steph's summary. I think it's helpful to distinguish between the things that aren't straightforwardly in our gift, which is about rising standards and things getting increasingly complex and challenging, and things that are completely in our gift, like mandatory training. And it was very striking that when the site chief medical officer for St George's gave what one might euphemistically call vigorous encouragement and support to the department to get their mandatory training done, it really shifted the dial. And even more euphemistically, some targeted encouragement and support. And it's difficult for the most senior leaders in the organisation to do that in every single area, and they shouldn't have to. But it does remind us that we can shift the dial on things which basically go down to the way our staff behave, and the root cause of some of those behavioural issues, I'm sure, is that people are dealing with more and more demand. They're busier and busier. But sometimes they let things drop that they shouldn't, and we mustn't let them.
Thank you, Richard. That's helpful. Did you want to come in, Jacqueline?
So I think the CNST is about how we reduce risk to babies and mums, isn't it? That's where it comes from. And like most things, it's about processes and whether we've done the right process. But I think the national team are re-looking at that, about actually how it's a bit more meaningful to impact, rather than say, well, we've done these 4 processes, therefore nothing should ever happen, because that's not life as a rule. But I think they're changing it again next year, that might be more meaningful, maybe more helpful, but I don't know.
Thank you. Chris wants to come in. Before you do, Chris, I think I'll give you the final word, Andrew, if that's okay. I think the point you just made, Richard, about it can't always rely on senior people, nagging about, sorry, you didn't use the word nag, but focusing people's attention. It goes to the heart of some of our cultural issues, doesn't it? And how we support leaders to focus on the things that they need to support, to focus on. And it's not all about us chasing around, trying to make sure things happen. Chris?
Thank you. I was going to raise this under the maternity section on the agenda, but as we're here, the on training, is it in people's employment contract that they keep their training up? So I can see a nodding head there. So it implies that people are in breach of their contract if they don't keep their training.
Yes, it's part of something that we observe constantly around our staff. They have to be up to date.
It's in the contract that they have to do learning and education.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a point well made, Chris. Derek.
For medical staff, it's monitored through the appraisal. For medical staff, it's monitored through the appraisal system.
Presumably nursing's the same.
Yes, it is, but it's not, because doctors, it's about their revalidation, isn't it? as well, whereas the nursing's, it doesn't come under that. So that's why sometimes you find it falls off. But in this circumstance around maternity, the nursing aspect, the midwifery aspect is very good. It's just the obstetricians and other team members.
Indeed, and the information we get around that enables us to see very clearly where the problem areas are in terms of levels of training. Haven't seen any other hands, Andrew, so final words from you?
Okay, I'll give you a reflection. I think there's probably three areas we could think about harder. One is the actions that are set out against these things and the progress we're making and holding ourselves to account to deliver in timelines and be really clear about where we're on trajectory and when we're not. I'm not sure that's always as clear as it could be. I think there's really important conversations to be had around the priority of some of these things. So a good example is transitional care, where to deliver that we need an increase in the establishment at St George's. And the question is, if that is a priority and we're clear why it's a priority, if we think it's a real quality and safety issue, for example, and we feel it's a priority, then why is it taking so long for us to get the business case through? Because it has taken a long time. So if it's a priority, let's get that sort of stuff pushed through. If it's not, then let's have realistic conversations with the team about why it can't be done now. The third thing is the risks that sit with some of these things. So some of them, I think, are more about administration and recording information, which I'm not so bothered if we don't hit the target because the impact is potentially financial. But I'm looking at this with a quality and safety lens because that's the job of the quality committee. Some of these, though, if there's elements of the Saving Babies' Lives bundle that might save babies' lives, I don't accept that we're drifting on them. So I think it's just being really clear why we're trying to hit each of these targets and what the risks are if we don't hit it, because that will help us focus.
I absolutely agree that, and that's really where my question was. Are there some areas that are non-negotiable, in spite of the, obviously we want to hit the overall thing and get and meet the requirement, but within it, are there some things that are non-negotiable against others that are nice to have? I think as a board, of course, and Andrew, you know this, even though you're speaking as chair of Quality Committee, we have to balance all of these things. Money, performance and quality, and as we know at the moment that is particularly challenging. I can't see any other hands. Did you need to come back on anything, Steph?
No, that's
all
fine.
right?
Thank you.
Okay, so we're asked to note that report. People happy to do that? Thank you. Moving on to the Finance Committees in common. In Anne's absence, Tim has very kindly, I hope, agreed to report back. Tim.
Indeed, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'll take the paper as read. I guess my reflection is that we are at the mid-year position now, and both trusts are reporting a position that's adverse to plan. And this is the result of the expenditure, the additional expenditure to mitigate the impacts of the industrial action, and the consequential loss of the ERF income as well, plus inflationary pressures around a lot of our major contracts. The committee looked particularly closely at SIPs, and we noted the improvement in the conversion to fully developed plans, but there's still a significant gap that we need to close, and of course there's an ever-decreasing window in which to do so. So that was a particular focus for us. On performance, I won't say too much because we're going to look at the IQPR sort of later, but in terms of performance, both trusts are under pressure for non-elective pathways with long wait times in ED, and I'm sure that's an issue that we'll discuss a little bit later this morning. Diagnostic performance remains strong, cancer performance generally on track at Epsom St Helier, but some challenges at St George's here. In achieving the 28-day faster diagnostic standard, which is really due to capacity constraints, particularly in the skin service. The committee received a number of reports over the last 2 months, notably around controls, and we in particular took a proposal to implement a no PO, no purchase order, no pay policy, which we approved, and also on cash. And we noted the approval by NHSE for the Q3 request for cash support, although not at the original level that we had requested. That was discussed in detail, particularly around the mitigations should NHSE's assumptions prove to be incorrect. We did note that NHSE have said that should either trust require cash, then this could be fulfilled by an emergency request at that time. I think the remaining items in the report are fairly self-explanatory, but I would just say a word about risk. I mean, we looked particularly at financial risks and agreed that there would be no change to the risk scores for group financial strategic risks, which are both set at 25 in each trust. And operational risks will be reviewed in November at our next meeting.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. I'm conscious that we're having a discussion later on money, so there may not be any particular points at this stage, but just in case. No? Okay, so we're asked to. So that was easy, wasn't it, Tim? We're asked to note that report. So if we can move on to people committees in common, I'm not sure whether it's Yin or Martin.
It's me.
Yin, over to you. You chaired your first meeting.
I did, yes. Thank you. So I'm just going to feedback and highlight two key issues that the committees would like to bring to the attention of the board. So we met on the 22nd of September and 20th of October, and the paper sets out the two key issues. We're going to talk about that quickly, and then about the wider issues, and then I'm going to touch on risks. So I'm not going to say too much about the workforce race equality standard as well as the workforce disability equality standard, because I know that Paul's going to be speaking about it later on in the agenda. But I did want to say that the committees were disappointed by the lack of improvement and decline in some of the indicators. So for example, so far as RES was concerned, at St. George's, there was a decline in 6 of the 9 indicators, and at ESTH, there was a decline in 5 of the 9 indicators. And this was despite the investment and the effort that had been put into the culture program. We understood that the reason was that there was mainly due to resourcing issues. However, the group board, as I understand it, will be discussing the wider culture program at our December development session. And to ensure ongoing focus, the committees also agreed to review the RES and the DES action plans on a quarterly basis, starting from November, our November meeting on the 24th of November. So that's all I propose to say about RES and DES. And then the second thing, just to highlight to the board, is the situation around employee relations, or ER. So clearly the organizations are in different places. ESTH functions more established and better overall position, whereas so far as St. George's is concerned, it's more fragile, needed significant improvement. We understand that there's a service improvement program that's been put in place, and the committees discussed the challenges facing the ER service at St. George's and the remaining challenges at Epsom and St. Helier. And the committees decided that as St. George's was at an early stage of implementing the actions to strengthen the service, for example, the appointment of Samson Ellen, who's the head of ER recently, the committee agreed that despite all that, we could only take limited assurance in relation to ER performance at St. George's, whereas we could take reasonable assurance for ER performance at Epsom and St. Helier. As I said earlier, some of the wider issues which the committees received assurance are all set out in the paper, so I don't need to go through them, but I did want to highlight the group culture, equity and inclusion program work that's been ongoing. The first work stream under civility and psychologically safety, the committee was heartened to hear that over 1,000 people attended across 3 sessions, so that was positive. Then, so far as the review of risks is concerned, we've added a new risk around sexual safety at work. This is probably on the back of the surgeon's report on addressing sexual misconduct on healthcare, which the committee also discussed. And we will be doing deep dives on individual risks each month to review whether the actions could be completed and what else has been done. So that's all I propose to say, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. Martin, was there anything that you particularly wanted to? Okay, Jenny.
Thanks very much for the report. Obviously, it's disappointing that we haven't made progress around the equality metrics. And you mentioned constrained resources. Everything that we've heard, and we're about to hear more about the finances, means that that's going to continue. I think it's important to keep it on the agenda. It's difficult, though, perhaps to do every aspect of it. And if we can't do everything, can we not go to that group and say, of all these things, which we're not going to be able to service them all, are there one or two that we could still focus on to show our commitment? But I think it's a bit demoralising to look at the whole spectrum. And I think people need to be spoken to honestly as well. If we haven't got the time or the resourcing, it's not that we don't think it's important, but there are enormous pressures. So have an honest conversation and ask them what would be most helpful in that environment to focus on.
Thank you, Jenny. So I take your point completely. And for example, around the RES indicators, the workforce data consists of four sort of workforce data, and then the data on staff survey before, and BME board representation on one. And clearly there's a widespread of 9 indicators in total. So perhaps if it could be sort of focused on maybe 1 or 2 of the key priorities just to change the landscape, it would sort of particularly be going down the right direction. So thank you.
I wonder if the issue is also about choosing to focus on something that will actually hit a lot of the targets. So the one I always think about is if we could improve the quality of leadership and management in the organisation, then I think we could reasonably expect that to have an impact on a number of areas. I often think we spread ourselves too thinly in terms of HR effort, and as a result of that don't do anything very well really. Anyway, Paul, you indicated, and I think Chris and Derek. So I'll take all the comments and then pass to Ian. So
yeah.
Paul.
I mean, just in response to that particular question about what do we focus on and how do we engage. I won't say too much now because obviously it's on the agenda later on, but we do have our staff networks that we meet with regularly. Gillian, Jacqueline, myself, Martin, we meet with them regularly and we try to understand what are some of the big things that if we could do would have greatest impact. So we do that. We're also, I think it's also important to remember that, and I'm going to say this a bit later on, whilst the RES figures look really disappointing, they are quite limited in terms of what they look at. So if you look at our staff survey results, for example, actually for most of our BAME colleagues, they actually have a more favourable experience than their white colleagues. And so the danger we've got is with RES, it looks at very specific indicators. It looks at 4 out of 5 questions out of about 80 odd questions. Overall, it's not a completely representative picture. So I just think that's an important point to make. But the final thing to say is you're absolutely right. We have got very limited resource across both organisations. We have one person working on this at each organisation. And these are really, really big issues, you know.
Indeed. Points well made, Paul. Chris.
Thank you. Just on the medical revalidation responsible officer annual report, and this reflects back on something I said a bit earlier on. So there's mention in there about low level of appraisals or a lower level than would be satisfactory for doctors, and within that obviously would come the training elements that people are required. So The committee got assurance on that report, but I just wonder what the committee can do to try and bolster the responsible officer's role in ensuring that appraisals take place, which again are presumably contractual for staff, and that the appraisal includes a thorough look at the training needs of the individual. Thank you.
I'm just going to take all the questions, if I may, and you may want Richard to comment as well, but I'll come to you first. Derek.
I may have missed this, and apologies if I have, but in the context of cost improvement programmes, we're running vacancy control panels, I think, at both trusts, and wonder if we could be assured that they're not impacting on quality.
I'm not sure whether it's fair to ask Yin
No,
on that one.
It strikes me it's a missing element within
No, it's a good question, but I think we might have
there's
to
no
ask
reference to them at all.
Yeah, we might need an executive to comment on that, so because they're very much an executive mechanism. It's a very good question, though, Derek, if I might say so. I think that's, yeah. Do you want to come in on the
medical revalidation?
Yes, thank you.
So if I just sort of explain a bit of context and then just sort of tell you what we're doing. So 1,100 doctors are connected to the trust, which is quite a large number, of which 157 are doctors. And I think out of those, 103 have had their appraisal meetings completed. There is about 54 who have not had their meetings for a number of reasons, either because they are on leave or maternity leave, or they've not been able to find a particular date to meet with their sort of medical appraiser. I mean, at the committee, we did discuss about the possibility of widening the appraiser pool so that you have non-consultant appraisers or you have non-medical appraisers as well. I know that other trusts would do that. And then because it's a hospital group, you have St. George's and Epsom St. Helier who are able to almost look across the two trusts, which is advantageous. So we are alive to the fact that there are a small number of people who've not had their sort of appraiser meetings, but it's something which is constantly on our radar. I think the figures that I gave was about Q1, 23 to 24, and we would look at it every quarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Yin. I think the committee is very on top of it. It's difficult for the committee to necessarily directly impact it. Did you want to come in on this, Richard?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So in total, in gesh, we have 1,881 doctors who have what's called a prescribed connection, i.e. either St. George's or ESTH is their primary place of work. And that doesn't include trainee doctors who are connected to what used to be called the deanery. I think if you broke it down into two questions, because I think there were really two questions, how do we make sure that more people get appraised? And then secondly, how do we make sure that appraisal picks up and drives some of the compliance processes and training up-to-date processes? With the first question, I think that probably the key thing is to, again, drive with some targeted encouragement in those areas where it's needed. So there are perfectly legitimate reasons for some people not to have been appraised yet. Health, maternity leave, so on and so forth. But there are other people who aren't engaging very well. And those people, I think, need a bit more targeted support than they're currently getting. And maybe not just through the responsible officer, maybe through some other mechanisms as well. In terms of how we make appraisal more of a driver to compliance, it's worth recognising that it wasn't invented and designed to do that. But I think there are more opportunities that we could take, mainly through the training of our appraisers, to attach an appropriately high level of importance to things like mandatory training. There are organisations that will give a doctor a certificate of satisfactory appraisal and withhold such a certificate if the appraisal wasn't perceived as satisfactory, with consequences. And it may be there's some options like that can be explored as well. I envisage in the future the group having probably a single responsible officer. They'd need to be separately appointed in each organisation, but with some restructuring, we could probably formalise an overall group-wide approach to this with some additional targeted mechanisms of driving some of this better.
Thank you, Rich. That's helpful. Perhaps I could ask Martin and Ian as joint chairs to make sure that that isn't lost, because it's an interesting mechanism, I think, that we might fully explore, which we wouldn't have known if Richard hadn't been able to tell us that. Martin.
Okay, so mine was going back to the res and des, and I wanted to say something on. So I don't know if there's any.
Well, I was going to ask James just to say something about the vacancy panel, if you don't mind. Sure, exactly. Put that one to bed, Martin, and then I'll come back to you.
So in general, the vacancy panels are applying to non-clinical posts. Where they are applying to clinical posts, it's not applying to rostered areas. So, you know, where we've got a roster that we're recruiting to, we're not applying vacancy control panels to them. And there is clinical input. So certainly the corporate vacancy control panel, because I recently took a post through it, and there was a clinical presence there. I think the bit that we just need to keep an eye on, and I don't think there's a really there's a really qualitative way of assessing this, but I think it's sort of a management function really to keep an eye on it, is by sort of pushing down on non-clinical vacancies, are we sort of shifting non-clinical work into clinical areas? So I don't have any firm evidence that we are, certainly for STH, but I think that it's the job of the SLTs really just to mitigate that risk and just to keep an eye on it.
So I suspect that is a real risk, actually. Having run those kind of things in other organisations, it does displace the work onto those that are left. It's just the nature of these things. Right, Martin.
Yeah, perhaps just a quick comment on that, one that we might want to come back to, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe currently that there's any data that the NEDs see from the vacancy control panels. Debate as to whether we should or we shouldn't, but quality is one aspect of it, and also there's been questions in the past about there was a debate at the last People Committee, actually amongst the exec rather than the NEDs, about how many vacancies were being withdrawn as a result of it. So I think that's just worth noting. So.
Okay, before you go on, Martin, to the EDI point, I think Andrew wanted to come. Did you want to come in, Andrew? Was you holding your phone up at me? You weren't showing me the BBC article. You were indicating that you could usefully add to this discussion.
Seeing I'm late, and I apologise for that.
I warned everyone at the beginning that you would come in about
jump
now.
in early. No, we do provide summary information of the numbers of posts that are reviewed and the numbers that are approved, rejected, or challenged for more information. That is reported in the controls paper to the Finance Committee every month now. We've done that for the last 3 months. So if people want to see more detail, we can maybe have a conversation about how we may wish to expand that.
Can I just say I'm not sure we do want to see more detail.
No.
That there is a danger, I think, that one asks for more information and drowns as a result of it. Sorry.
I'm not going to say another word.
Okay, right, Martin, EDI.
Okay, so going back to the discussion, and I'm picking up particularly on Jenny's point and supporting it, I think one of the issues that has been the case for a while is that we don't always look at evidence of what works. So the action plans have often tended to be very long, and if you think about it in terms of sort of the medical analogy, you tend to look for evidence, and then you tend to look for evidence that supports a particular outcome. So Paul's absolutely right that if you look at other data, it's rather a different picture. But I guess what we have to decide as a board is the res and the des are national measures. They're public information. They compare us with other trusts. So if that is what we're going to be measured on and measuring ourselves on, then really we need to pick the actions which are most likely to produce the results. Now, I don't know, but just for example, Paul is absolutely right about very limited resources in the sense that there are 2 specialists across both trusts in this area. But on the other hand, what was actually said was that it was the culture change programme, which we were expecting to influence the outcome. Many more people are involved in that, and I suspect there's much more impact of all the other priorities that we've got impacting attention and time than so in other words, even if we doubled those to 4 people, I would be very surprised if it produced a direct impact in terms of the res and des scores. Equally, I wonder if sometimes we could challenge more. One of the things that has become the norm here and in many organisations is to have big conferences, to invite specialist speakers, and I don't know whether or not the people who need to be convinced actually attend the conferences or not, but clearly when you've got such limited resources, it takes an enormous amount of their time and budget to organise such things, and it may well be that we've got evidence that they improve the res and the des, and if so, great, but perhaps it's something we should look at.
I think they're really, really good points, Martin. I support you in both of them. Jacqueline?
Excuse me. I suppose when we were talking about this, I was reflecting over the year that we've had, and we're all quite passionate about improving diversity, having good leaders that embrace the whole of their teams and lead them and support, excuse me, support differences, etc., etc. But I wonder whether sometimes we get into a habit, and you sort of alluded to it, Martin, really, about ticking an action rather than transforming behaviours. Because culture is all about how we operate around here, how we behave with each other. And it's that bit, Paul and I have started the conversation about how do we actually get into the transformation bit of this rather than the transactional action plan of it. And I think that's the bit we need to give a bit more thought about. And I think I'm sort of with you about some of the conferences we have. We usually get the people who are interested in it, not the people who need to come. And then what then does that have the input, other than making the people who are interested just think, well, I was right. And yes, they were. We knew that all the time. But I think it is about where do we target what limited resource we have to make a transformational impact and not a transactional one.
So because these are really important topics that need some thinking time, I've agreed with Stephen that at our next board development we will devote some proper big chunk of time to thinking about these issues and trying to turn the dial in a different way. I think covering the kind of things that we've highlighted in the discussion today. So it's not that I want to close it down. I created an opportunity for us to have more discussion on it, but I think there is a limit in a formal board as to how far we can take some of these ideas. I don't want to lose any of them because I think the things we've discussed have been really helpful, and we will take those forward in our December meeting. But for now, I would like to ask the board to note the committee so that we can move on to the Infrastructure Committee. And again, in Anne's absence, Phil, you're covering this item.
Yes, indeed, Gillian, thank you. So this was the first Infrastructure Committees in Common meeting, so an inaugural meeting, and it had a pretty full agenda. So I think there's absolutely the case for this committee, and the terms of reference have already been approved by the board. So the paper has obviously been read, but a few things to bring out. The Epsom St Helier EPR, electronic patient record, was the first project, was the first thing we looked at. This is going to go live in April 2024. This is transformational. This is a really important thing because it then ties that in fact domain in with the domain here at St George's. So it's really important. And we were pleased to get the report, and we were pleased that the programme is on track. So it's really, really important, but there are ultimately risks going forward. So even though we've had a bit of an external review with the NHS's digital trust system support model, they agree that it's on track. They undertook their review in July. However, there is learning from other EPR rollouts that actually it's probably a good idea to reduce the amount of work one's doing running up to an EPR rollout. And we can't do that. We've got to keep going at full pace. So we've got to change this system at the same time as flying the plane at full pace. So that's something which is a risk which needs to be managed. The other thing that's noted is quite often issues come up after, not in the first week, but 6 to 8 weeks after the thing has gone live. So it's really important we have lots of reviews post going live to ensure we embed it and make sure it works. And we were assured that there is plenty of internal governance of the EPR programme. There's an EPR steering group. established, which reports into site leadership team and the group exec. So it's on plan. We in the committee, we're going to get regular updates as we go towards the April 24 date, but also we'll be reviewing post go live as well. So a very important piece. The other thing, there's a couple of things that bring to your attention. So we went through the estate return information collection and premises assurance models for both St George's and Epsom St Helier. St George's is on a sort of, it's going well with this. Its ratings are improving, which is good continuous progress. Epsom St Helier, we're probably going to see a rating decrease, which is probably about how we have put together the documentation more than real issues, but we're going to dig into that further as we go. And these are two things that this committee will review: the Estates Return Information Collection, the ERIC, and the Premises Assurance Model, the PAM, to see whether, to give us high-level KPIs as whether the estate is doing what it should be doing. A couple of other things that I would just bring out in the body of the paper. We talked about digital planning and priorities, and it's absolutely clear that there are more demands for digital improvements than there is resource. So meeting colleagues' expectations around digital is not going to happen, and we need to continuously work with what we've got. And where there are transformational things like the EPR at the electronic patient record project at Epsom St Helier, we need to make the absolute most of them. We talked about cyber risk as well, and how that had been worked through, and actually NHSE commended us on how we in fact handled the incidents. So and just finally, I mentioned the group green plan, and here there's some really good work going on. Generally getting grants, extra money from other places, which is really good and really important. And I just bring to the board's attention that we're on to this. And I think in some areas, like I think smart theatres, we're actually leading the work in the country, and it's really good to see that we're focused on the green agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Phil. I've seen your hand, James, then Derek, then Jacqueline.
So I'm not a member of the committee, but just to come in on the EPR point, because I think there's a bit of a nuance around the standing down activity. I think from the conversations we've had at ESTH, I think to not reduce activity at all over the app's actual go live period would be a really significant risk to us. And there was a risk that we just simply wouldn't manage to sort of onboard the system, do the cutover, and continue with 100% of activity at the same time. The requirement from NHS England is that, in overall terms, we don't lose activity as a consequence of implementing EPR. I think that what's not clear at the moment is over what period we were expected to sort of make it good. Now, given it's at the end of month one of a financial year, and we're about to do 24-25 planning, I am hoping that the answer will be we can plan over the rest of 24-25 to make good on the activity we have to take down in order to do a safe EPR implementation, because then we can smooth it over the next 10.5 months. If the answer is you need to catch it up in the rest of the quarter or the rest of the half of the year, that will obviously be harder. But I think that's the way I think we're going to approach it, to make sure that we balance the two.
Thank you, James. Seems very sensible to me. Derek?
Thanks, yeah. Sometimes when you read a report, a number jumps out at you. And under section 4.1c, I'm not suggesting people go to it, it talks about violence and aggression, and 54 incidents on a single children's ward required escalation as security incidents. And I'm not asking for any granularity on that, but I wondered if there was a theme there, and I wondered if the theme was about the care of patients with mental health issues in the acute trust. And I didn't know whether the committee had had a chance to dig into that at all. Is that in fact the theme, or is there something else? But 54 incidents in one children's ward is quite concerning.
Do you need, to be fair to you, Phil, do you need an executive to answer it?
I was going to ask,
question,
that's probably one for Kate, isn't it? Yeah. And just before, I just completely support what James said. I think that's a really sensible, and that's the point really, to raise these things so that then risk mitigation does take place, which is, so thank you, James. Okay, can I ask you to...
Kate, it's about Freddie Hewitt.
Yes, that's right. I mean, we've had a number of occasions on Freddie Hewitt, which Gillian's alluded to in her visit today, where we've had patients who are really quite mentally disturbed or extremely autistic, and end up, we really struggle to place them where they need to go next. And I think it's caused a lot of distress to the staff, linking to sickness and raising of lots of incidents. So we do know what it's about. We have obviously put in a lot of interventions to support the staff and work this through, but it's a very real problem of having patients here who are not best placed here, but are considered a place of safety with some of the authorities that have responsibility for them, so which we're picking up separately.
I think it's fair to say it's an ongoing issue that we're grappling with, Derek, and some of the there is an issue about whether they're placed in the right place, but some of these people do need physical interventions because they need that only we can do. So it's a really difficult area, and I think it's causing us a lot of anxiety and the staff a lot of unhappiness. So it's right that you should flag it up. Jacqueline.
One of the questions James answered actually, so that was helpful, and I think planning for that is absolutely right. The second bit is, are we, maybe not to you Phil, but it might be more of an Andrew question, are we planning to not report for a period of time? Because there seems to be, when you look at the Royal Marsden, King's and GSTT, they haven't reported for about 6 to 8 months because they've put a new EPR in, and I'm just wondering whether we're going to try not to do that.
I think the basis of the challenge we've been given by NHSE, as James outlined, which is you're not allowed to let activity or reporting drop, is a consequence of other trusts doing that. So they are coming back to us and now saying, well, actually, when you implement an EPR, we expect you to maintain service levels and reporting across that period. As James outlines, what they mean by that period is something we need to refine and discuss with them. Is it on a day-by-day basis? Is it across a quarter? Is it across the year? So I think we need to understand the detail of that and challenge back. But we need to be, I suppose, just be realistic in the sense of the nature of that challenge. Changing, these systems is a massive undertaking. They are fundamental to the operation of the organisation, and they are hugely complicated. And they are highly dependent on, individuals being able to pick up, a new set of skills and a new set of actions. So we are working hard to address all of those issues. So we need to be cognizant of the risks, but we also need to be cognizant of the challenge from NHSE in terms of doing that. And I think it's an issue we'll need to keep close scrutiny on through both the project groups, but also through the infrastructure committee and up to the board as we begin to approach that deadline.
Yeah, well, I'm very clear about where my priority is, and that's about safe implementation. It's interesting that you make the point, Jacqueline. So despite the strictures of the centre, a number of organisations, at least two of which are much better resourced than we are, have struggled. So I'll leave it there, I think. Any other points, or can we note this report and move on? We're lagging behind, so I will. When we get to some of the other items where we've actually had quite a bit of discussion, I will speed us up. So just a word of warning to everybody. So if we move on to item 2.5 and the George's Audit Committee. Peter.
Thank you, Gillian, and we can hopefully save some time on both of these Audit Committee reports, which I think for the most part are straightforward, partly reflecting the time of the year, mid-year, so there's a lot of planning work going on, but we'll be reporting later in the year. So, but just to confirm, provide the assurance we're on track on issues like cyber, fraud and waivers, the standard issues that we look at on each occasion. Internal audit planning is going well. There's good implementation of the recommendations from previous audits, so that's all good to hear. There is one issue in particular that we can come back to in the private section, Julian, so I'll in effect will stop there on the Geordie side.
Thank you very much.
If you'd like me to move straight on to the ESTH.
Why not?
why not indeed? And again, good progress on the standard audit items around cyber fraud, etc. Just two issues I think just worth picking up. One is, obviously we had an initial discussion on learning the lessons from last year's external audit, which obviously was quite challenging, but discussions have been ongoing at exec level with our auditors, and I think we'll be receiving a report to our next meeting that we can look at and hopefully learn from and build in any changes that need to happen for this coming year's audits. And secondly, we had a focus on progress on outstanding kind of internal audit recommendations, and there were a number where there had not been responses to requests to update on progress. So that left us slightly worried about where things stood, but we had the assurance from Stephen he was going to be actively following up to chase up, and I'm sure working closely with James, who was unable to be there to provide an immediate response. But nonetheless, we'll have a report back to the next meeting. Hopefully by that stage we'll hear that actually good progress has now been made on all those recommendations, because it is important once the audit has been completed that we follow through. So those were really just the two items I wanted to highlight from ESTH, and otherwise all's well. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take comfort from those two words, Peter. So is there anything that you wanted to add on the follow-up for ESTH?
Yeah, as I said at the meeting, I think there's partly an element of the handover between the two sets of internal auditors, the handover between the two, because I think our incoming internal auditors had sort of picked that up and escalated it quite close to the meeting. Now that we've got that, we are following up with the leads for each one. Peter's right, some of those will sit with the site, but not all of them. So I think what the auditors will do is give us a cut for ESTH as a trust, as a corporate entity, some of which sit with the site team, some of which sit with group executive directors. So following up with all of the individual leads on that to make sure that they're getting progressed ahead of the next meeting.
Thank you. You don't need to say anything, James, do you? No. Okay. So I can't see any hands. Oh, Tim. I'm not encouraging hands at the moment, but please.
I do apologise. Just a brief reflection, if I may. I'm sort of slightly doubling back to the infrastructure discussion here, and just to tie those two things together. I think one of my reflections from the infrastructure committee, particularly around the IT stuff, if you like, is just how much is in flight at the moment. And we rightly put attention into the EPR programme and, gained assurance from that position of that. But I think one of the challenges that we've got going forward is when we look across the landscape of all of the things that are going on, is how we actually bring above the wall, if you like, and give sight to those things that are particularly important, those things that we need additional insurance on because they have major impact, if you like, for the organisation. So we talked about dashboards and that kind of thing, and I think that if I can sort of, a little bit of a counterpoint here is that I think in the conversation we had at Infrastructure Committee about estates, there was sort of science and structure around that conversation, which was really helpful to understand what was going on. And we just need to do a little bit more work, I think, in the IT space to actually bring that kind of focus to those activities. And I think then we will all know, we will feel more confident that we know what is going on some of those really important programmes that at the moment are a little bit submerged.
I think those really good points, Tim, and Andrew, I'm sure you've heard them. Yeah. Can we ask that you give some attention to that in terms of the assurance piece? Did you want to come in?
Yeah, sorry, just one. I don't disagree with that, and we need to make sure there's the visibility. One of the things I would sort of put a bit of a plea back in the sense of it's maintaining the engagement across the full range of projects is the key issue as well, because people have an interest in certain projects because there's a direct impact on them, but there's also a lot of important projects going on that don't have an impact, but don't have an impact from the project, but the implementation does, and it's how we maintain that balance is really quite important, and that engagement.
No, I absolutely agree, Andrew. All those things that if we don't pay attention to, all the rest collapses. I can't see any other hands, not encouraging hands at this stage. So we're asked to note both reports, but in relation to ESTH, there's a number of additional points, particularly around the timeliness of management responses, and to note the approval of the adoption of the SBS recovery policy and the updated debt management policy. People happy to support all of those? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. So I'm moving on now to item 3.1, and we're running 25 minutes late. But I think we can pick up time because we spent a lot of time already on maternity. Steph, over to you. Anything that you need to particularly flag up?
Thanks, Gillian. Just two things to say. The Embrace data is being collected, as we know, and we're due to have those findings in late January, just so that you're aware and the committee is aware. Board is aware, should I say. And then the other thing, just to say that Epsom and St Helier have had their CQC maternity review. We've done our factual accuracy, and that's submitted last Friday. We have had no updates so far, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Stephanie. It's probably worth just us reflecting that we did have a board development session on maternity, which I think was very helpful, and we agreed that we'd have another one in the light of the, whatever it's called, in the kind of helpful inspection that we've just had. Yes. Thank you. So we probably do need to think about, Stephen, how we're going to fit that into a very crammed diary. Andrew.
Yeah, probably just worth spelling out. This week we've had the National Maternity Safety Support Programme doing the review of maternity, and so they reported back yesterday. So obviously then we'll need to reflect on what they've said and work out what next. I think it will be in 8 weeks that they produce their final report, which will then give us some detailed suggestions and recommendations. But it was a very helpful visit, and they really were here to try and understand what's going on and try and work with us to agree how we take things forward, which was good.
So that implies that probably the next board development session around maternity might have to be January, might it? Yeah. But I bumped into Annabelle on the stairs as I was coming back from Freddie Hewitt, and she was full of enthusiasm about the visit. She said she found it incredibly helpful, and the fact that it was peopled by directors of midwifery who really understood the service.
People who really knew what they were doing. Yeah, it was really helpful.
It made a very big difference. It was nice to see the enthusiasm, actually. Right, any other points on maternity? No? So I better get back to what we're meant to be agreeing. We're asked to note the compliance status of the CNST, which we've talked about a lot. Note the risks and mitigations brought to the attention of the board, which we've also discussed. Note that the safety investigations people are now hosted by the CQC, and any recommendations for further action, I suggest that final item we take throughout the board development on maternity, rather than trying to have a discussion here now. I don't think that's the place for it. People happy to support that? Lovely, many thanks. So that takes us on to item 3.2 and the EDI report. Again, we've already had quite a substantial discussion, and we know that our board development in December will have a big chunk of time on this. So in that context, Paul, is there anything you particularly want to flag up?
I don't think so, given the conversation we had earlier. I think it is a difficult area. We're not alone in struggling to make progress in this. It's not to say that that's any comfort, it's just some context. If you look at London, I don't think we're alone in lots of the issues we face. I suppose if I look at it just disability-wise, I am, Res and Wades, I'm disappointed. From a disability perspective, I'm particularly disappointed by the fact that some of the work we've done in relation to things like a reasonable adjustment fund doesn't seem to be quite having the impact that we'd hoped it would have. So one of the things that we consistently had feedback on was actually local managers don't always have budget to make adjustments. We put into place a centralised budget. It doesn't seem like it's having the impact. There's probably more we can do, and just putting a budget in place, not communicating, I don't know. There's more we need to do. I I think this is a complicated subject, and I would welcome the discussion at the next board meeting. Happy to take any questions based upon the papers as they are at the moment.
Thank you very much indeed, Paul. And I ought to make the point that because of timing, this report had to be published, which I think the People Committee weren't hugely enthusiastic about. We thought that it would have been better to have had it earlier, so it could have gone to a People Committee and gone to another board. But we recognise that with boards every other month, it's not always easy. But we can always slot in a board on a development day. So for next year, we'll try and get that right if we can make the diary work. I can't promise we will, simply because of the way these things work out. But in an ideal world, we would have wanted the board to sign off important documentation like that. Peter.
Thank you. Just a quick question on the deaths. The impression I got from a quick read is that principal focus is on physical disability, and there didn't seem to be much of a focus picking up on mental health and issues surrounding that, whether I missed it. But if that is the case, then it just makes you wonder whether we've fully captured the extent of the issues there, and we need to look more widely at mental stress and issues that are very important for staff.
I suppose, do you mean in terms of defining whether somebody has a disability? Because it's about self-declaration. So what will happen is somebody will self-define. There's a criteria that we use, but mainly it's down to individuals to decide whether they have a disability. It's not to say there isn't a criteria, it's over 12 months, it's a significant impact, all of those sorts of things, but it's whether people are self-declaring whether they have a disability. I think you're right, there is stigma with mental health, and so often people don't declare as a result of that. But it's down to the individual to self-declare whether they feel that there is they have a disability as a result of a mental health issue. I think in terms of support, we do offer a lot of support for occupational health through staff support and a number of different areas that we offer that support, but it comes down to the individual letting us know what they need.
I think both of those points are well made, Paul. It is a question of self-declaration, and we know that people are not declaring for a whole range of disabilities at the level we would like. We've actually put a lot of effort into that with limited success. But I think Paul is right that when people are experiencing problems, there is a lot of support available if they're able and willing to access it. So. But this is very much work in progress, I think. So we're asked to note the report and the fact that the reports have already and action plans have already been published. People happy to note that? Thank you. So that takes us on to the IQPR, and we've caught up some time, which is good. We have a habit of losing ourselves in the IQPR. And there's only 20 minutes allocated on the agenda, so I would urge colleagues to be very focused and to talk about the things that we need to talk about at board, given that there's been extensive discussion at finance committees and quality committee. James.
So, Gillian, we have a cunning plan to make the introduction shorter, so I'll do the introduction.
It's just the introduction.
And I think James, Kate and Thurza will then subsequently field questions or themes that we need to discuss about rather than do a long presentation, if that's okay. So as you said, there was extensive discussion at both the Finance Committee and the Quality Committee on the IQPR. Some areas that we discussed in those committees and I'd like to draw the board's attention to in terms of quality. Unfortunately, we should note that there had been a never event at both St George's and at Epsom St Helier, wrong site skin surgery and a retained urethral guide wire, respectively, at the two sites. We noted the ongoing challenges that St George's have in terms of preventing category 3 and 4 pressure ulcers, and the ongoing challenges that Epsom St Helier have in terms of VTE assessment, which is quite long-standing. In terms of operational performance, we noted that there's clearly an overlying theme about the impact of industrial action on our delivery of performance and elective care and activity, but it's not the only issue that is stopping us achieving the parameters that we would like to. So we are challenged with respect to 52-week waiters, particularly at Epsom and St Helier. We noted 2 key specialties and mitigating plans being put in place to reduce the challenges in those specialties, which we hope will have a significant impact before the end of this financial year. And likewise, we looked at plans to eliminate 65-week waiters, which has become a rising pressure, particularly at Epsom and St Helier, with community peds dominating that. Having said that, there are some areas of some very strong performance. Diagnostics is an area of strong performance at St George's, and certainly we're seeing improving trends at Epsom St Helier. Cancer performing at Epsom St Helier continues to be strong, but we did note some challenges in high volume specialties such as skin, and St George's continue to try and mitigate a number of challenges in cancer specialties. We are beginning to see some green shoots in terms of theatre productivity. It's probably not showing through on this IQPR, but we have very active programmes in place at both trusts, and more recent data suggests some improvement in our productivity. And then, as we discussed earlier at the start of this meeting, we noted the significant pressures of flow into, through and out of our hospitals, with the pressures being felt particularly in our emergency departments. And whilst we are achieving the national 4-hour standard of 76%, we continue to be challenged with the numbers of patients waiting 12 hours or more post-decision to admit, and with delays in ambulance handovers. So I think I'll pause at that point. We'll invite questions, and I'm sure Kate, Thurza and James will be happy to take them.
Thank you very much indeed, James. So I've seen Andrew initially. Yeah, go for it, and then Phil. I'm going to take a few questions. I think, James, see how it goes. Depends what people ask, I guess.
Yeah. So well, my question is around the RTT and the 52-week waiters. I guess what I'm particularly interested in is the worsening gynae performance at Epsom St Helier and the improved gynae performance at St George's. And if we're genuinely operating as a group, why aren't we thinking about it as a single PTL across the group and actually helping each other? That seems to me a real benefit of the group, that we almost have our own networks regardless of what the system's doing.
Excellent question, if I may say so. James, do you want to have a go? Or is that not fair to lumber you with it?
No, I'll start. We have posed that challenge. So both trusts have their own internal improvement plans. We know that dermatology and gynecology are under significant pressure at both trusts. Epsom St Helier particularly have seen a significant rise in referrals into the gynecology service, and have adopted some transformation approaches in terms of the outpatient pathway, and also some plans for recruitment substantively to get a better match of demand and capacity. We did put the challenge across to both site leadership teams to explore the opportunities for collaborative work, and the early indications are that St George's gynecology service is also under quite a lot of pressure, and the opportunities for immediate mutual aid are limited, but we are going to actively revisit where we have significant asymmetry in waiting times for first appointments, with a view to liberating the sense of a more singular approach to performance, to think about what are we doing collectively.
Thank you, James. Kate, was there anything you wanted to say? And then I'll ask James.
Well, I'll just amplify to some extent what James has said, and to pick up Andrew's point, I mean, I think it's a really fair challenge. I think it does take time to develop a shared PTL because you've got to get clinicians on board and bring them together. We've actually done some really nice work in community peds to begin to think about how we might work differently together going forward and move towards sharing patients and doing things differently. I think gynae is quite pressured here as well, but I think from my experience from before, the way to do this effectively is you do need to bring clinical teams together and look at how you work differently together. You can't just say, it doesn't work very well to just say, oh, let's just shift the patients across. It creates angst and concern. But we've got some examples where we're beginning to do that more. Jacqueline's pushing us very hard to do that, and I think that's right. And but I think we've got to give the time to bring people on board with us. But I think it's definitely the direction of travel that we're going in.
Chris, I've seen you to save your hand. But I'll come back to you because I just wanted to land this one first. I think it's an excellent challenge and I think it's one we will come back to. Was there anything you wanted to say,
So I think the specific advice we had from the St George's site leadership team was that taking the risk from taking the long waiting patients from the ESTH PTL was to 62-day cancer performance in gynae at St George's. And obviously when we're balancing the risk of a long waiting patient at ESTH who's on a non-cancer pathway with the risk to a cancer pathway at St George's, obviously if that's the advice from the St George's team, then that's what's caused us then to look at whether the alternative route is all the stuff that we're doing to mitigate that demand and then the outsourcing. Kate is right, we have been able to identify more scope for progress within community paediatrics, and therefore we're now on sort of 3 streams of community paediatrics. One is the mutual aid, the second is a bit of outsourcing alongside it because the mutual aid won't be enough to get us back under 65 weeks by the end of March, but the third stream is exactly what Kate talks about, which is then to look at what we do to really integrate the pathways and integrate the teams. Now we've picked the most complex possible one to start with in a sense. So we've actually applied for innovation funding from South West London to support us with that piece of work. But I kind of think if we can do it with community paediatrics, we can probably do it with anything. So, yeah.
Well, I think it's worth coming back to simply because it's one of the big advantages of the group, and if we're not exploring it and making it happen because it's all too difficult, then I don't think we're really interested in hearing that message, really. Sorry, I don't mean either of you said that, but I'm just kind of posing the challenge back.
Can I just come back? Because I've been through a lot of this in a previous organisation, and we use the word integration, and I think we need to be careful about because that makes people think you're just going to merge the 2 departments and they become one. I think it's about reducing unwarranted variation. I think that needs to be a big focus about how you do things in a similar way and reduce that unnecessary unwarranted variation by bringing clinicians together to design those pathways together.
Yeah, that's a point well made, Kate. Thank you. Jacqueline?
I think everybody's right. I think we need to also try and make it not too complicated. So if we look at Croydon, I know, Croydon's a DGH, we have lots of simple stuff, but, we have shifted a huge amount of work to Croydon in weeks. So the question I have really for both the managing directors about the clinical engagement is how do we really impassion not only our clinical teams, but our local managers getting that working together, whether it's taking patients from Epsom St Helier or Kingston, is actually the right thing to do if our waiting times, even if they might be higher than we like, are less than theirs, because we have to work as a system. It's that system approach that we need to make sure we're pulling through our organisations. But that would be my only challenge about not overcomplicating this.
Well, there's a danger in health. I think we have a habit of overcomplicating everything. Right, Andrew, final point.
Can I just come back with a further challenge on overcomplication and maybe not reinventing the wheel? I mean, just the example of gynaecology, there's a South West London gynaecology network that's been looking at exactly this for a couple of years. So rather than, I'm sure we're not going to start from scratch, they've looked at trying to consolidate pathways and create a context where you can move patients around because everyone's working off the same approach. So I'm hoping that there's already a fair bit of groundwork being done and we can work within that framework.
Well, James is the expert on the networks.
So it is complicated, as you know, Andrew, and I think in terms of that sense of collaboration and moving patients around South West London in specialties. I think there was a lot of early momentum with that in the immediate post-COVID period. I think over recent months that has become more challenging as there's potentially a tendency for us to get slightly more insular as we face operational and financial pressures within organisations. But that doesn't mean that it is the right thing to do, and we are the biggest part of South West London, and therefore we need to explore and utilise that sort of scale that we have as a group. If we can't do that across South West London, we should certainly explore the opportunities of doing exactly as you're indicating as a group. We did have an ambition to set up a number of clinical boards across our specialties to promote that sense of exploring the variation in practice, the learning from each other, the potential sharing of clinical pathways and design and transformation of clinical pathways across the group. I think we had to pare back our ambition in terms of the managerial and clinical time to support that work, and what we have done is to identify a number of pathfinder specialties that we can use as exemplars, and then if we get success in those pathways, such as community peds, that we can scale it up across more pathways.
Thank you. I think it's been a really useful discussion, and clearly more to talk about at other times. But for now, I think we need to move on. Phil.
So largely my question has been covered. It was about paediatrics, and I think James said in his introduction that the aim is to get back to less than 52 weeks by the end of the financial year. And I suppose my 65 weeks, he said, by the end of the financial year. So I suppose my question was going to be, is that really possible? And yeah, that's where I was.
So with the outsourcing proposal that the group exec approved last week and is now in the ICB triple lock mechanism, provided that we have the ability to move forward with that in reasonably soon, we think that the 70 outsourced and the 75 outsourced and the 30 being provided on mutual aid basis by St George's, along with some of the process transformations we've already made in terms of what the clinical staff are doing, should get us back to zero waiting over 65 weeks. But obviously we need all of those things to come off. Unless something goes seriously wrong, it will be a significant improvement on the current position in either case.
Thank you. Chris? Oh, right, okay. Lovely, thank you. Any other points that anybody wanted to question? Or Thurza, is there anything you needed to say that you feel you're being prevented from saying because no one's asked you a question?
No, I'm holding back for the discussion about flow, but I'm not sure if that's going to be asked.
I had a quick word with Jacqueline. We agreed we'd probably have that in part 2. Because I can't say, we either have it here or we have it in part 2, and Jacqueline and I both thought we'd probably have a more productive conversation in part 2, if that's all right. Okay, so I can't see any other hands, so I think we have to note this report, don't we? And then we will, if that's agreed, we'll move on to the finance report. Andrew.
I could probably keep this very brief. In essence, the position remains consistent with that reported across the previous 5 months, 5 months, but 4 reports probably, which is we are on plan except for the cost consequence of industrial action. And in George's, that's... I've written the wrong numbers now. The variance is 3.4 million, Epsom 3.4 million, at George's it's 12.2 million from plan. It's worth pointing out both plans are significant deficit plans, so the total deficit in Epsom is now 26 million, the total deficit in George's is 27 million. But they were planned deficits, but we are exceeding them to the value of industrial action. That is consistent with reporting across London at the moment. I think the other point to note is, as I've said before, I think the second half of the year will be far more interesting than the first half of the year. There are a lot more challenges in the financial plan and position as we move into that period. Indeed, we'll be picking some of that up in part 2 from recent announcements from NHSE. But we need to just be cognizant of that, so the performance to date doesn't remove the challenges that we still face as we go into the second half of the year. The pressures that we face, can largely be summed up as the financial cost of the operational pressures that we're seeing. CIP delivery, there was this hugely challenging target, and then inflationary pressures that we've experienced. But again, we've outlined those before.
Thank you, Andrew. I think it's well understood, and Tim, who was presenting the Finance Committee report, made a number of the same points. Knowing that we're having a substantial discussion in part 2, I suspect there's nothing to be said at this stage. People are happy to note the report. Thank you. So that takes us on then to item 4.1 and the Group Board Assurance Framework, which I think we're all very pleased to see after the hard work that we did at Queen Mary's last month. Stephen, over to you.
So I wasn't going to say a great deal because obviously we've had quite a number of discussions about this at a number of our board development sessions. So this is the culmination of particularly 2 sessions that we've done in terms of developing the key risks to the delivery of our new group strategy, mainly at the April and the October board development sessions. I think we had really good and useful discussions there, and what's set out in the paper seeks to reflect all of the feedback, including the detailed drafting comments that people went through at that meeting. So the proposed set of risks are 14 strategic risks across the scope of the whole strategy, split across the different domains of the strategy, if I can put it that way. 3 for collaboration and partnership, 4 for affordable services fit for the future, 4 for right care, right place, right time, and 3 under empowered, engaged staff. I won't go through the wording now, clearly. I won't read them out, but we've tried to adopt an approach that reflects the sort of good practice in the articulation of risk as we capture some of these to really focus how we focus on the actions to mitigate. So hopefully those feel broadly in the right place. In terms of risk appetite, we had some useful discussions there at the board development session, and what we've tried to do here is articulate for each of the 14 strategic risks the outcome of those conversations about risk appetite, as well as to set out at a very high statement level our approach to risk appetite and how that informs our decision making, and contextualize where we're saying we've got an open, high approach to risk. Actually, what do we mean by that? It doesn't mean that we're going to be cavalier in our approach to risk. It means that we are willing to be bolder and more willing to tolerate risk in some areas where that will help us achieve our strategic objectives. So a set of proposals is in the paper on that. And then the final bit that I was going to highlight is in terms of ownership, both at executive level of each of these strategic risks and the board committee, or in some cases, the board oversight directly of each of the strategic risks.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen, and for all the work that you've done pulling together the discussions that we had last month. Questions or comments? I've seen Andrew. Oh, I've seen a few hands, so I'm going to take all the comments and then to Stephen. So Andrew, Tim, Peter.
My question was just around strategic risk 1, which is working across our local systems. Because when we talked about it, we framed it as the importance of integrated working and what that would do in terms of demand for acute services. So you're talking then about prevention and early intervention. But given the discussions we're starting to have around flow and the importance of collaboration for getting people out of hospital, I just wonder whether there's another element to this risk, which is impact on our flow if we don't get those collaborative relationships right. And that almost seems to me like more of a burning platform than the medium-term impact we might have on demand.
Thank you, Andrew. Tim?
Yes, just briefly, a sort of reflection, really. I was just thinking back to the day that we spent at Queen Mary's looking at this, and I do remember that at the end of that, we left you, Stephen, with quite a lot of wordsmithing to do around describing these risks. And I think that what you've come up with, I think, is a really good balance. And I was pleased to see some of the things like staff well-being and what have you actually coming through to the top of the tree. The bit that surprised me slightly, not in a bad way, was when you went on to the risk appetite piece. And I looked down the level of risk, and actually of those 14 strategic risks, only one of them is one where we are really quite risk averse, which is understandably around patient safety. And I guess I'm just reflecting that I'm just wondering, with the positions as sort of described there, how that is going to influence or drive the way in which we work, if you like, to deliver against those strategic risks. Does that make sense? So it's a bit almost a non-question really, but I just think it's sort of important to think about how it's going to impact the way in which we actually work.
Yeah, I think it's a fine question, Tim. Peter?
Thank you. And I thought overall the paper was excellent and really clearly set out. So just a couple of brief comments. The first is around SR4 on achieving financial sustainability. And I suppose the question is whether it's sufficient. If we do, of course, we should be doing all the things that are referenced there about managing costs, etc., optimizing productivity, yes. And ensuring our activities are effective. But that if you read it, or one implication might be if we did those things, it would be sufficient to achieve financial balance. Now we know, we'll go into more discussion around this, it's unlikely that even if we did all of that, we'd be able to, because it comes back to the question of whether we have sufficient funding to enable us to be sustainable in the longer term. So, it's whether or not this accurately reflects our thinking about where we are in practice and whether we ought to in some way capture the fact that an important part of this equation is doing all of those things, but also we need to ensure to the extent we can that we are as reasonably funded as we can be. So that's the principal question. The only other quick point was really about SR8, and whether or not on reducing waiting times we ought to more explicitly reference delayed discharges, or the fact that if that is a major kind of blockage in the system flow, whether it's a consequence or cause is debatable at a different point. But it seems to me, given our previous discussions, that this is probably the single most important factor in enabling us to move forward, as it were. Then it seemed to me we ought to perhaps be more explicit that that's a key issue that needs to be addressed as part of this risk. Otherwise, thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Can't see any other hands, so over to you. I was trying to think whether I could rewrite them on the spot and concluded I couldn't.
I might take Andrew's point and Peter's last point together because I think they sit well together. So, I mean, so in strategic RSA we try to be explicit about improving flow and the importance of that. And likewise in SR1 we talk about demand. Now we could absolutely try and build flow into SR1. I think we've got to be, what we're trying to do is to try and, as far as possible, not to have risks that were too overlapping with each other, and to try and separate them out. But that you're absolutely right. I mean, flow fundamentally links to this. I think some of the challenges on both of them are, when we then take these as strategic risks and we unpack them and we set out what are the controls, what are the mitigations, and what crucially are the actions we need to take to address some of these, I think when you see the next level of granularity down, I think then you'll begin to see actions to do with flow and how we have those conversations across the system referenced in the fully scoped out BAF. I think there's always a bit of a risk that you can't fully capture everything in what is meant to be a fairly pithy piece, but we can absolutely look at that wording and see whether we can build that in. And likewise on the delayed discharge, I think the similar points, and I guess the other piece is what we plan to do once we've agreed the strategic risks on the BAF is then to map and develop the risks on the corporate risk register that sit under these. So I think where there are specific points around delayed discharge, there may well be then a corporate risk relating to delayed discharge that sits under this and helps inform this particular risk. So I think we've got to see the BAF and the corporate risk registers sort of sitting alongside and complement each other to some degree. In terms of SR4 and the wording and whether we need to build in having enough money, I mean it's a good point, and we do make a similar point in terms of the modernising our estate one in terms of the capital funding. We could certainly look at that. I don't know whether Andrew would want to. We've tried to sort of reflect the sort of 3 E's in many ways in that.
What we tried to do on that one is, as Stephen said, is the risk is about us managing, economy, efficiency and effectiveness. And within that, you could say there is a judgment of funding in that sense. So, effective use of public money. And also referencing it then, the risk very much to the judgment that the external auditors make in their value for money report. And again, they will pass comments on our use of public funds and whether that is appropriate as well. And that will also comment on whether you are funded appropriately. I think Stephen's fundamental point is we can't fit everything in, and these become very wordy. So I would recommend we pick that up more in the second layer of this, because I've tried to reference this, or we've tried to reference it very clearly around, that a very overt national measure of the effective use of funds in terms of how we do that. So that was the rationale.
I thought it was a good point from Peter, but I think if this was being looked at nationally, they would say, well, you've got a lot of money, you're going to have to live within your means. I think they would be unsympathetic to a risk that, yes, well, I know they are. So I completely understand where Peter's coming from, but I think we probably have to live with it as drafted. And my suggestion is that we resist the temptation to try and get everything in at this stage and test it at the next level and see if we can live with it and recognise that this will be an iterative process. Over time we will tweak them. It's just the nature of the beast, I think. But I do think we've made an excellent start. Did you want to say anything about risk appetite? I think it's partly because we've changed the way we do risk appetite, actually, Tim. So I think we're using a different measure in a way, aren't we, to the past?
Yeah, we've tried to sort of define it in a different and a more flexible and qualitative way than I think maybe we've used it in the past. I mean, there's always a temptation on all of these risks that we face to reflexively say we've got a very low risk appetite, we're very highly cautious, and what we're trying to do here is to build a framework that might help decision making in a more practical sense. I think there's another level of detail to go into, and I think for each of these risk appetites, the thing that I'll be asking committees to do before this all comes back to the board in January in a fully worked up BAF is to actually define the risk appetite statement for each one. So that will build in some of the nuances about exactly what do we mean by when we say cautious on local system. What do we mean by that? What are the kinds of trade-offs we'd look to make? So again, I think there's another level of detail that we'll look to sort of explore through the committees. And just to your point, Gillian, I think the BAF needs to be, while we want to set the risks here for what is a 5-year strategy, the BAF does need to be a living document. So where risks evolve, we shouldn't be resistant to look again at the wording and think how we need to better reflect it. So we should keep that under review.
Yeah. Okay. So I think what we're saying is there'll be a next iteration going through committees and then back to board. And all the points that have been made, I think, are really valid and valuable. But we would nevertheless like you to agree it as it currently is. Is that all right? Yeah, people happy to do it on that basis. Thank you very much indeed. Right, that takes us on then to a couple of items for noting, both of which were fully explored at Quality Committee. The first of those is the Group Learning from Deaths report. Anything that needs to be... We don't need to repeat the discussion, do we, Richard? Any points that anybody is worried about? Talked thoroughly about it at Quality Committee, no? So we'll note that. And equally, the Healthcare Associated Infection report, again, thoroughly covered at Quality Committee. Everyone happy there as well? Lovely, thank you. So that takes us on almost entirely on time, which is excellent on everyone's part. Thank you very much. Any new risks or issues identified? I don't think I heard anything new. I do wonder if we've got ED captured adequately as a risk on our corporate risk register. Have we?
We've got it captured. We've got it captured in different ways on the two trust corporate risk register. So on the George's one, it's mainly around from a performance perspective, and I don't think we on the George's one capture fully the sort of quality elements of the risks there. I think we need to do that.
Look at that,
and that's part of the conversation we had at the quality committee last month.
But I think there's also something about the staff, the pressure on staff there as well. So
Yeah.
I think if we could look at the wording in both,
Yeah.
that would be helpful. Thank you. Any
I was wondering when we last updated the corporate, because we've got 3 sides, and making sure that we do that once a month in part of your meetings when you're not you talking to the managing directors actually, because it does feed up and down, and if one's really correct now, we want to make sure that the corporate ones are correct, and it doesn't sound like we've had the recent view of it, but I might be wrong.
Well, I think that's part of the issue, that they haven't. We've been struggling with the engagement to some degree in terms of getting them updated. That's across all of them, but I think in terms of, so there's a paper that will come to the group exec in a couple of weeks,
and we
that
can
will set
sort
out
it out
exactly
then.
how does it need to work.
Let's leave it
because
to that then.
I think the group that needs to be agreeing risks on the trust-wide corporate risk register can only really be the group executive, because that is the chief officers of each trust.
Okay.
But it needs to be informed
by the
at every level,
the
from the
site
division
level,
to the site and upwards. Yeah.
Anyone else got points? Is the culture risk adequately covered, do you think? The whole EDI culture thing, we spent quite a lot of time talking about that. Is it adequately covered in our corporate risk register?
I'm not going to say whether it's adequately covered, but one of the things we're doing at the People Committee in a couple of weeks is we are scheduled to look at the risks again. So I think we need to have that conversation at the People Committee.
Yeah. Okay, that's certainly my view. I can't. Then no one else is putting their hand up, so I think that probably means there isn't. As you know, I'm not a fan of any other business, but we do have an item this meeting, and it's Chris's final public board, and he's going to do the usual. People hate this, but unfortunately, Chris, it's one of those things that when you're leaving somewhere, you have to be subjected to. So I wanted, on behalf of the board, to say a big thank you to you. You joined the ESTH board because Lawrence and Daniel were busy acquiring GP practices, I think, at the time, or a GP practice, and they wanted somebody who could help them around that, and particularly the assurance piece, which you did admirably. But you also took on important work chairing the two boards in the of the community services, and that we will be looking at some proposals around that in our later meeting. But you've brought all your knowledge and wisdom as a long-standing and experienced GP to those tasks, but also to the board, and asked a lot of the what if and why questions, and I've always valued your ability to do that and ask questions that sometimes other people thought but weren't prepared to ask. That's a real skill. So a big thank you, Chris, for all that you have done for the ESTH board, and the energy that you've brought to the joint committees and to the joint board as well. I think you've played just as important a role in George's. You've never just seen yourself in this forum as only going to concentrate on the ESTH stuff, and we've appreciated that very much indeed. So there will be another opportunity, obviously, but this is the public board, and the only opportunity I have to put it on public record for our thanks to all you've done, and how much we will miss you. And as usual, I'll give you an opportunity to respond if you would like to.
Thank you very much, Julian. Thank you for your kind words there. It's been a privilege to be on the board of Epsom St Helier, and I'm not quite sure what the right phrase is around St George's, but to attend the gesh meetings. And I wish St George's and Epsom St Helier and the group all success for the future. Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. But thank you very much to everyone, for allowing me, well, sort of allowing me to be here, but interacting with me anyway. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. And as I say, there will be other places, and we have a tradition of having dinners, so we will be having a dinner to celebrate all that you've done for ESTH and the group. And so I'm going to move kind of seamlessly on to 6.3, reflections on the meeting, because I've asked Chris if he would lead the reflections. It always seems a good opportunity when somebody's going and they've got a kind of perspective and they're looking back at it all and give us some insights into what works and what doesn't work so well. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much again. So I don't know whether it is because it's my last public board meeting, but I'm sure it is actually a reflection on the storms that are afflicting the NHS in general, but certainly our local area at the present time. This meeting felt to me a little bit, in a good way, stress that, slightly harder edged than some of our other board meetings. There was a sort of an acknowledgement of the problems that are facing us, but also that not all those problems, it's within our gift to be able to change. It also reflected, I think, on occasion, some perhaps, though we have to challenge ourselves on this, perhaps unfair expectations from the centre on what we can and cannot do, and maybe the EPR is an example of this, how you continue to operate whilst making a very fundamental change to what you expect the staff to do. And it is not just us as an organisation or as a board. There are thousands of individuals who have to implement such changes. And it's a big ask of them. And some of them will find it very challenging because it's IT, and some of us do find IT challenging. I thought we've touched on flow and things like that, and I suppose this may reflect my role on the board as well, but the importance of integration across the system, the importance of, and I feel that there's a leadership role that gesh has in integration across the system. It's the biggest, by far, employer of healthcare staff. It's got the biggest budget. I would suggest it's got some of the best leaders within our area, those people who can drive change and improvement. Therefore, I think it's beholden on this board to grapple with that, not just as we are an acute trust, but how do we work and help lead and develop what goes on around us. And that doesn't necessarily include taking over GP practices. But I leave that to the future. And it was only one practice anyway at the time. I am pleased, and I would like to, what's the phrase now, call out Thurza. And I would congratulate this board on having a Director of Integration on the board. So I'd like to say thank you to Thurza for all she's done to foster that integration. And I know there's more to be done across the general area. I think that's really most of what I had to say. I should have said this last bit 2 minutes ago, but I do look forward to my invitation to the opening of SETCH on the Sutton site. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Well, yes, you're quite allowed to mix your response to the comments about your contribution with the reflections on the meeting. That is entirely allowed. Are there any other reflections? I want to ask you all whether it worked putting the committee reports first, because we had the discussion last time about whether we would do that, and we did it. And I was just left wondering whether the performance discussion was just a bit too curtailed as a consequence. But I haven't concluded that in my mind. I just wonder, did the balance work better for people by having the reports back from committee first, or really none of you really got a view on that? Richard, you've got a view, have you?
I have got a view. I quite liked it. I thought it worked quite well. I think that I thought the reports themselves were very clearly written and had quite a lot of information in them. But but it helped us to think about the big picture first, and then we have the option of delving into more detail with anything afterwards. I'm sure if we keep going with it, I'm sure we'll get more used to that. But personally, I liked it.
I think that's helpful. And given that assurance is such an important part of the board's responsibility, it's quite nice just to lump it all there. But Steve and I will reflect on whether my instinct is to leave it, but we might need to leave it a bit and then have another review. Jenny?
I support the change because I think sometimes it becomes very formulaic, and I actually really enjoyed having a different distribution. So, mind you, I'm a bit of a change junkie. I like new things, but...
Okay. Well, on balance, people seem to think it was a good thing. Jacqueline, you've got a view.
So no, I did quite like it. I think it's also just trying to manage that bit between what happened in the Committee X and then the paper that went into that detail. So the Res and WDes would be an example of that, and just how we might thoughtfully think about that going forward. And I think the other bit is the bit that when I spoke and then you added a bit about the board is about making sure that when do we do the strategic bit in here? And I know we do some of that in our board development session, but we have got a strategic plan. So there is something about where do we weave that through here? And that I just think we might need to give a bit more, without having it as a chunk of strategy and this is where, but how do we, we've risk through our board committees. Where do we, how do we weave maybe strategy through that question?
Indeed. One for another time, I think, because it's now 12:41 and it's time for us to move on to the patient staff story. So I think I'm welcoming Veronica and would you like to? There we go. Yeah. Yes, come on. We're very inclusive. A very warm welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Veronica, you are a patient partner carer and a member of our Patient Experience Partnership Group.
That's correct.
And you've very kindly come along today to share the experience that you had when your father was here, I think. Yeah?
Yes, yeah.
So I've been properly briefed. A warm welcome and over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Veronica Rocher, and yes, I'm a patient partner here at St George's and have been so for 5 years. Our family knows St George's very, very well. My father worked here. He transferred from St James's to St George's as head porter. I've had all my children here. I've got lots of family that's worked here as well. I've been looking after my parents for the last 10 years. And more so the last 2 years because they now live with my husband and I. And it's been a journey, it's been tough, it's been hard working as well. And my children are older now, so that helps. But I have grandchildren as well. So for me, assisting my parents, my mother in remission with breast cancer since 2013. And my dad became blind, registered blind, when he was 83. And combined with that, he had what's called Charles Bonnet syndrome, which I had to research, and contacted the Royal Society of Medicine to attend meetings to know more about it. And more recently, over the last 6 months, Dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's dementia, and that's when everything started to happen. He was then admitted in St George's in August. Beginning of August this year, and we just saw him change from the man that he was, even though he was blind, to someone that was become aggressive, upset. It put a lot on us as a family. So whilst at St George's, he was admitted to Heberden ward, and that was my real experience of the care that he received in Heberden. When I look at it from the environment, warm, welcoming, nurses, doctors explained a lot of things to you. The quality of care is extremely, extremely good. Everything was explained. what could I say? The food. I know we've done tastings some months back, and I did suggest that we try tastings blindfolded, because then it gives you a sense of what someone who's blind, what they would be going through. I'm going to follow my notes because then I keep on track. In terms of communication, communication is good. I think through one experience where you may have a nurse that may come in to work, but not work for St. George's, there may be agency. Well, this person was agency. And not knowing fully about the patients in that ward. And there was a doctor on that ward who was a patient, and his wife and his daughter was a doctor. And the doctor had said to this new agency member, my husband's not feeling well. And she then said, how do you know, are you a doctor? And I thought, ouch. So as she was walking back out of the room, I called to her and I said to her, could we have a word? And she said, yeah. And I explained to her, actually, who you just spoke to, they are doctors. Even though I think they were just shocked at the response. But again, as I said, I'd never seen this nurse before. It's interesting as a carer if I'm the type of person, no matter where I go into the hospital, whether it's inpatient, outpatient, whatever, I will always speak to other patients. And in Heberden, I would speak to friends, family members, and just to get an idea of how they were feeling about things. And I found that sometimes they were a little bit apprehensive about things that they wanted to talk about because they didn't know how to approach or who to approach. And then I would give them a little bit of guidance and say to them, this is how it works, etc. But I think as carers, we're forgotten. I don't think everyone realizes how much work we have, even from discharge to social workers, to the nursing homes or the residential care homes. What we have to go through, very bureaucratic. Depending on the hospital, the paperwork is always different. So you just find yourself in a position where it's hard, it's difficult to give the answers, the right answers, or the audit trail from the hospital to the social worker, to the home, to myself. And I would say, well, actually, Daddy's really aggressive. And they say, well, it's not in the paperwork that he's aggressive. So how do we assess him? Do we assess him as low, moderate, or high? And I'm just like, well, I'm telling you of an experience, and I have to give examples, etc. And I said, well, maybe this is the kind of thing that you need to talk to the doctors and nurses when you need information, because then it's correct. You know, my dad came into hospital, he was in A&E, and they had to call 3 security guards for a blind man. They had to. And they handled it really, really well, but that wasn't noted. So you don't know when the trigger is going to happen with a patient. Whether that patient's going to get aggressive, you don't know, because if he's got Charles Bonnet syndrome, he's got Alzheimer's dementia, which one is it? He's got hallucinations, what's going on? What medication is he supposed to be on? So, yeah, it's quite a journey. Any questions?
Veronica, I'm sure there will be. So I want to first of all say a big thank you, because I know it's not easy to come here and talk about experiences that are often difficult and emotional. And so big thank you for that.
Thank you.
I think the message I've heard so clearly is about listening to carers and making sure that we write things down. Communication is always the thing that comes back and bites us, I think. Anyway, I can see lots of hands. I'm going to start. Sorry, Steph, I saw you after I saw Andrew, Richard, Jenny, and then Steph.
Thank you, that was really powerful. Building on what Gillian picked up on, how can we hear the voice of carers better? So what would your suggestions be for what would have made the most difference?
Finding out if the member of the family is a carer is one. Normally you just go into the ward and you just say, I'm the daughter, but no one asks who you are. And I just think sometimes there's no room. I think when I was at Heberden, I spoke to everyone in that room. Are you a carer, wife, blah, 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 what do you do? How do you manage? And more recently, actually this Tuesday, I've joined a carers WhatsApp group, and it's the same message. They're not invited to talk about it. You just go in and you assist and help. You might even help with other patients. If the nurse has to leave the room and I say, actually, I'm a patient partner, I can keep an eye in case someone wants to wander off or get out of the ward. I think it's communication. It's finding out who the people are that are visiting. That will make a difference.
Thank you, Veronica. Richard.
Thank you very much for coming to talk to us. I'm Richard, I'm the Group Chief Medical Officer. Listening to you talk about your father's condition made me wonder whether we had ever talked to you in an explicit way about whether he did or didn't have mental capacity to make decisions about his own care. Because if you or I were in hospital and we chose to wander off, nobody could stop us because it's a free country. But that's not the case for a lot of our patients. Did you ever have those kind of explicit conversations with our staff, or did you always feel it was something that people took for granted without framing explicitly and asking your view on?
I was never asked. I always made it a point to say, when I got the opportunity to talk to someone and say, this is what my dad has been going through. This is what he has. Because there wasn't a link between, say, Moorfields and hospital, because I was always told that Moorfields is separate to St George's. So I had to make a point in having put in his file. I just don't think that much is said about it or clarified with me at the time, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Veronica. Jenny.
Again, thank you very much for coming. One of the things that struck me is your compassion and your intelligence at navigating something that's incredibly complicated and we don't help. And what went through my mind is how, for those patients who don't have somebody as wonderful as you advocating for them, and what we can do, because you're in fact gluing all these disparate things together, but it's taking a huge amount of time and effort. And maybe that's not for you to answer, but I think it is for us as a trust to answer, because you're ensuring safety, and there must be patients, many of them, who don't have your advocacy.
I think since joining PPEG, I come from a family of doctors and nurses. So growing up from a Caribbean home, we were always taught that basic first aid, about certain drugs, etc. And I think, how can I put this? I then decided, so when I started working in, it was acute frailty, I decided to look it up because I'm a researcher. So I looked it up and I thought, oh, I'm going to do the course. So I done the course. And I think other carers you should be able to give them that information as well. So I done the course and it was on a frailty scale of 1 to 9. I done the short course on Charles Bonnet syndrome because it's pertinent to my dad. But also in terms of frailty, I needed to understand that. And I think that's what carers need. They need training. Definitely need training. And there's so much out there that is free, but they don't know how to access it.
I think that's right. But identifying people as carers is such an important first step, and we seem, on the basis of your experience, Veronica, to be some way off that. Steph, I thought I'd come to you last, because a lot of this is a nursing lead, isn't it? Any other? Yin. And then Thurza.
Thank you, Veronica. I was just interested in your role as a patient partner. Did you find it quite an easy process to become a patient partner? Is it widely advertised, and can people easily apply to become one or indicate their interest? Please,
Yes, I think it is. For me, 5 years ago, when I decided to do this, I didn't know exactly what it was all going to entail. So I was in pediatrics, I'd done ward assessments, I've done food tasting, which was good. What else have I done? Gosh. Yeah, but mostly senior health. And I think I stuck to senior health because of my parents. Yeah. Do you want to put that to me again? Because there was something else I wanted to say.
No, I guess it's for members of the public who want to aspire to be like you and what you do. Would it be a sort of easy process, and would it be easily known, and whether we can do more to encourage more patient partners like yourself?
So yeah, easily known as it is now, but now that I've joined this group, I can put it out to the group. And I think that's how you get that domino effect. It will start to really happen. Then you'll probably get oversubscriptions. But yeah, there is a lot of people that would want to do that, but they need to know more. Yeah, maybe something in a carers day that focuses on what you're doing as a carer. Explain to each other in the groups what you do, what you want to do, what you'd like to do, and also then give people an idea of what they can do and what's out there. So, yeah. You're welcome.
Okay, we've still got some questions to go. Are you all right?
Yeah.
All right. So then I've got 4 names, and I'll stop there because it's not fair to keep you so long. Keep asking all these things. Thurza.
Hi, and yeah, thank you very much. I'm the Managing Director for Integrated Care, so more into the community than in the acute hospital. I suppose a couple of reflections. One is that it's always interested me how lots of people don't identify themselves as a carer. They actually see themselves as being a husband or a wife or a daughter, and how we change the language that people recognise that it's someone that you rely upon, someone relies upon you for care, and I think that's an important bit of what you've described, and probably a lot of your conversations are built around. So that's one observation. And I suppose my other observation, which picks up on Jenny's point, is we run the acute frailty unit on the Epsom site, so in Surrey, and every afternoon the doctors ring the carers and update them about the patients. And one of the things we've noticed is that we have a lower readmission rate, and I'd never really put the two together, but listening to you and thinking about that just makes me realise how central care is to actually getting someone in the right setting. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
Really interesting point. Thank you, Thurza. Derek.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Derek. Hi.
Hi.
Really appreciate what you said. Sorry. Hi, I'm Derek. I'm talking to some junior doctors next week about treatment goals. You know, what do we try and achieve from an admission or a treatment? And the reason I'm doing that is because I don't think we talk about it very much. We make a lot of assumptions. You know, someone comes into hospital, they're on a pathway, they need this, 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 and this. And, you know, they're dehydrated, we need a drip, and we all think very mechanistically. I've been quite influenced by, sorry, I will be brief, someone called Atul Gawande, and he said, we don't always know what patients want because we don't ask. It's very simple. And thinking about me talking to these junior doctors, and I'm wondering, you know, when your dad came in, did anyone ask you what the goal of the admission was, what the end point was, you know, what we were trying to achieve by this admission? And if they had, what would you have said?
I don't think anyone had said that to me, but if they had, I'd welcome that, because then you prepare yourself for when they're going to be discharged. You know what's happening. You've gone through that whole process. I think it would help a lot more. So, for instance, what is it? The document. Is it discharge notes? Yeah. So I would ask for a discharge note, because then I would know. I wouldn't have to wait until I see the social worker, because for me, I need to be able, because a visual person, I like to just read and say, well, actually, something else is missed probably off of this. So I would like to phone and address it. For instance, what I said earlier, the aggressive side of what my father displays wasn't in the discharge notes. And I think that's really important, because at home, where he was at risk, not only to himself, but to others, is when he would lash out. Now, if you don't know that he's like that, and he's gone back home, or he's become like that, or he's gone to a home, the nursing care or the residential carers won't know. And if he does that, it would be quite a shock. So I think you need to have as much information that, in terms of health and safety, as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Jacqueline, and then finally Steph.
Hello, Veronica. I'm Jacqueline. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
So I'm not sure I'm going to ask you a question. I'm probably going to ask more Steph a question so she can... So I'm a children's nurse by background, and in children's wards, you always have, or nearly always have, a parent with the child, because unlike it was maybe 40 years ago, children are better and get better quickly. And what you also do is you actually develop with those parents how they look after that child. So quite quickly, they end up doing nasogastric feeds, and they begin to spot the things they need to know about. And it's a journey you go on with parents. Yeah. About 3 or 4 years, it was before COVID at St George's, we decided to move to open visiting for adults. And then the nurses hated it, but couldn't see the advantage of having someone's loved one with them, particularly if they were a carer, to support that person physically and emotionally. And I suppose, and I think that, and I think that's a real advantage rather than a pain in the neck, which is how sometimes it's seen. So the link for me is it's a bit about, do we ever ask Steph about who's the carer, and what, and the wider bit about what relatives want to do for their loved one in hospital, because that for me is the key between thinking that they're just cluttering up the place versus actually thinking they're adding something to that person's care and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steph, you're also allowed to say whatever it is you want to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Veronica. I'm Steph.
Sorry, Steph, could I just say something where that's concerned? Where you have, when it's supper, they call it, you'll have probably 2 members of staff trying to feed 3 or 4 patients. So then we say, I'll do it. I'll feed Dad, or I will help him feed. Yeah. And it works. Yeah. It really, really works. But that's what I wanted to add.
Yeah, I do.
Thanks. Thanks, Veronica. I'm Steph. I'm the Director of Nursing for Quality for Group. Nice to meet you. And governance.
You.
You do look familiar, you know.
Oh, yeah. It used to come to PPAY. There you go.
Yeah. Lovely to meet you, and thank you for sharing your story. So we don't always ask about carers. We don't. And that comes into what I was going to say when Gillian would come to me. Wendy, wonderful Wendy, who's here, who's our Associate Director for Group for Patient Experience, has been doing a lot of work on carers, and there's a carer charter that's going to come out for 24 to 27. Wandsworth Local Authority are doing it, as well as other voluntary organisations, as well as St George's. And what we are going to do to ensure that we get the voice of carers and we get you here and we understand what's going on, as part of iClip, Cerner, it's going to be something that's put on the system. Wendy's already done that. It's just waiting for it to be, finalised. That's always the hardest part. So therefore, when we have your loved one who comes into our hospital, we ask, about carers, which we don't now. And that then transfers into all our paperwork and all our documentation. And as part of this charter also, information, groups, you name it, we're going to do that because we recognise that. And we recognise the value and the kindness and the great work that you do. Because your family love you and they eat more when they're with you because you're talking around them.
That's right.
And they don't even remember what they're eating, you know. 'Cause you do that, you see that in senior health all the time. Once you engage with people, you put food in front of them. So it's really important, so thank you.
Thank you. And your carers will then become PPEG members.
So I think that's been really interesting. Thank you so much, Veronica and Wendy, for helping us to both have the discussion and think about the issues that you've raised for us. I'm glad that you were able to tell us that we're just, otherwise, as you know, Steph, the board would have been commissioning a piece of work. When will it roll out?
It's 2024 to 2020, I wrote it down in my notes, 27, but we've reviewed it, haven't we, the two bits of it, Wendy, what else?
When will it start happening, and when will people like Veronica actually feel the difference?
Well, so there's a huge project going on at the moment on carers, and so, for example, this afternoon at Back to the Floor, we have a collaborative steering group set up at the moment with members of the ICB, patients, carers, we've got carers activists on it, staff and everybody, and we've been working together looking at how we can embed the NHS England newly launched Carers Discharge Toolkit, which involves exactly what Veronica said about asking, are you a carer or do you support someone at home, identifying that, capturing it on the system, and then going through and involving them in care, which actually makes for a safer discharge with actually hopefully less readmissions going forward. So it's a huge connected piece of work. So we've got to, what we don't have on Cerner is a designated place where we store carer information. You'll find that lots of teams will do it routinely. So you might find if you come in through A&E, the STAR team might record it as a document, but that's a lot for people to go through. There's no quick place, and we find that we're asking people the same questions again and again. Okay. You know, it's duplicating staff time. So what we are currently working with Cerner and the IT team at the moment is to get them to create a brand new space on Cerner just for us to record unpaid carers' details, packages of care. If the patient in the bed is a carer themselves, in case there's a safety issue, which is part of NHS England's work. We're starting this afternoon at Back to the Floor. We've got Wandsworth carers coming in to train at Back to the Floor, our senior staff, with 3 further sessions going on about how to ask family members. Because if you ask someone, are you a carer? Often they will say no. Yeah. But I just help to look after my mum or my dad. And it's actually finding that information, drawing it out of people, recording it so we can involve them. So we've got all sorts of work going on. We're just about to open a carers forum as well, so we can hear more stories and learn from our carers as well. And we've created a contact sheet covering all the boroughs that we cover to connect carers with carer support services in the community where they can access training, support, advice and everything else. So it's a huge project which we're very excited about, the improvements it can make.
Can I ask another thing about that then? Sorry. The bit for me is how we change some of the culture in the organisation as well. Because there's one thing about noting it, there's another thing that people feel comfortable and confident in letting the Veronicas of this world do things like feed their dad, help them have a shower or a wash in the morning. Because I think that's the bit I see the difference, is that it's not in the adult nursing sphere accepted as a thing to do. We're quite paternalistic in that way, or maternalistic. So that's the other bit I'd like to understand. I don't need to know now, but like to consider about how we really change the culture.
It's about change. Yeah.
It's about people behaving differently, isn't it? Anyway, we've kept you an enormously long amount of time, and we do have another meeting starting, and we've got to have some lunch in between times. So, Veronica, a big thank you.
Thank you.
Really given us a lot of food for thought, and Wendy, thank you for coming along. And in a year's time, you might come back and tell us whether your experience as a carer is different, because all this work is making a difference.
It is making a difference. It will. Thank
all
you.
Right. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Bye-bye. Right, so if I just go back to the agenda, I think we've got to the stage where the meeting is closed, but have we got any questions from governors? we've had no questions from members of the public, but Hilary.
Patient story, just a comment. The most striking comment I think from the meeting was the question of patients being, the possibility of them being transferred between the different hospitals of the trust when one trust has more capacity in, say, gynecology or dermatology. And I mean, this is such an obvious thing to do. I do hope it can be expedited. And I don't think differences of procedure, variation in practice is a convincing reason actually for it not to be happening. Anyway, I just hope that's something that can happen.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think what Hilary's saying is the discussion we had about sharing things out fairly is something that she would really welcome seeing real progress on. Sorry, Hilary, I was struggling to hear, but I think that's what the point you made, was it? Yeah. So it wasn't such a question as an exhortation to keep at it. Yes. Well, I hope you got from the discussion that we agree with that, and the challenge to the board is to keep people focused on it. So thank you very much indeed. Richard was here. Has he had to leave?
He's coming back.
Richard Mycroft, I meant.
No, he's got his thingies.
Right, okay. Anyway, that's it. We've got a break until 1:45, and then we're back on again. So thank you very much, everybody.